lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota, and 6footmama.com. This is Still Growing with Jennifer Ebling. Still Growing is a gardening podcast dedicated to helping you and your garden grow. Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Still Growing, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. In today's show, I'm continuing my three-part series about the 2017 Garden Bloggers Fling, held in and around Washington, D.C. at the end of this past June. Today, I'll be joined by fellow garden bloggers, Beth Billstrom from the blog More Than Oregano, Jen McGuinness of the blog Frau, Zinnie, and Tracy Blevins of Plants Map. In today's episode, we'll be reviewing Day 2 of the 2017 Garden Bloggers Fling, and Day 2 was focused on gardens in the suburbs of the DC area. So we'll be reviewing wonderful private gardens in areas like Bethesda, Arlington, Tyson's Corner, and Great Falls. Now, some of these gardens are from private homeowners with a passion for gardening, while others were the personal gardens created by professional landscape designers. So it's a real treat to see the gardens that they nurture for themselves. We also stopped at Brookside Gardens, a park in Montgomery County. Beth, Jen, Tracy, and I had a lovely chat about all of these venues. And it's all coming up after an update on the listener community for the show and this week's Garden News Roundup. First, of course, I'd like to start out by saying thank you for listening to the show this week. I hope you're listening to a ton of gardening podcasts, and specifically, I hope you listened to last week's episode as we covered Day 1 of the Garden Bloggers Fling. You know, podcasts are such a wonderful way to continue to grow and learn as a gardener. And I'm sincerely honored that you're spending some time here listening to the Still Growing podcast. I'd also like to invite you to join the listener community for the show. It's a free private Facebook group that I host for listeners of the show. These folks are made up of gardeners of all skill levels and locations, and you can find it on Facebook by simply typing the name of our group into the search bar. Just type Still Growing Podcast Group, and the listener community will show up at the top of the search results on Facebook. Now, there are a number of benefits that you can enjoy just by joining the group. First, you'll get access to all of the great garden articles that I curate for the listener community. Second, the group is the only place I go to pick lucky listeners for any show giveaways. Third, you get a chance to interact with the great guests that have been on the show, including the guests that are on today's show. And finally, everything that's shared in the group is selected with you in mind to help you and your garden grow. Anyway, I hope you find some time this week to head on over to Facebook and look up our group and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. In the meantime, let's welcome new members that have joined the group in the past month. Ellen Mae Harvey, Polly Fox, Sydney Blodgett Sinks, Midge Miller Price, Darlene Urso, Sherry Rand, Julie Boer, Sandra Hammer Hermanson, Melissa Jean, Scott Riffle, Maria Parham Siegfried, Jinx Farmer, Robert Woolbright, Ashley Holloway, Ron Gingrich, Jackie Weinstock, Eileen Davenport, Louise Vandeweg, Kathy Martinolik, and Tim Rachel Beachy. Welcome, you guys. There were a number of great posts from listeners this week, lots of beautiful pictures and videos of listeners' gardens. Danny Perkins was sharing what was going on in his very hot garden. He wrote, "Hanging baskets that were moist at dawn are dry as a chip by mid-afternoon. Not complaining, as this is a heartfelt part of my life." And he's talking about watering his garden. And then he wrote, "Parts of the garden are shifting from vibrant color to many shades of green, awaiting the second spring, which is fall." Very true. Listener Julie Lang shared pictures of her beautiful garden harvest that's underway in her Zone 5B garden. For being a second-year gardener, Julie has an impressive array of vegetables that she's growing. Everything from broccoli and cauliflower to eggplant and salad greens. Good job, Julie. Listener Sarah Ladd shared what's growing in her garden. She has raspberries, broccoli, and date palms. Listener Sharon Jennings, someone I have a soft spot for because she and I both had rotator cuff surgery recently, shared a picture of catnip growing on her fence line. She took a picture of it and she shared that a friend had noticed that it was growing there, and it turns out it's a great plant to bring pollinators. Anyway, she wrote it's about 5 feet away from her garden and it is just loaded with bees. Listener Kathleen Brown Bonafonte wrote in and inquired about a plant that she'd purchased. Here's what she wrote. A typical stop at a local nursery to see about free or sad plants needing a home, and the only thing they had this weekend was a castor bean plant. I read it's poisonous to humans and animals. Do I plant it or toss it? With 5 dogs, 13 chickens, 4 ducks, they're free range, and a 5-year-old grandson, she was wondering what to do. Fellow listener Patricia Chandler Newport chimed in that castor bean is extremely toxic. And a number of other listeners chimed in with the same advice. So even though she rescued this plant, it is not something that Kathleen is going to be planting in her garden. That said, I thoroughly enjoyed 2 videos that Kathleen shared taking us on a tour of her brand new garden. And I say new because Kathleen's garden is just 2 years old. And my goodness, I could not believe everything she had gotten done and the amount of space that she's using. She's also using this really fun trick to help prepare her garden space. She lays cardboard on the ground and then puts a heavy piece of fencing over the top of that. Some of the connecting boards on the fencing create rows for her to plant in. And of course, the entire contraption works to kill the grass and other things growing in the area to get her garden ready. She also shared an adorable container that she's using, and it's a laundry basket, and that's what she's using as a strawberry container. I thought it was a super cute idea. And then finally, the other thing I really liked about her video is how she showed that she has an old dog kennel that she's no longer using that's near her garden area, and she uses it as a cage for her tomato plants. And that gives her plants protection from the chickens on her property. New listener Bernadette Ward wrote in and said, "Good day, folks. I'm looking for suggestions on what to plant to stabilize a 90-degree slope. It's about 150 feet long and roughly 15 feet tall. I'll post a pic as soon as I can. I'm currently in weed control on the slope and adding organic material. It's slightly alkaline soil and will not be irrigated. Zone 6 and north facing. I will be able to water to establish whatever I plant. And I'm currently thinking of native grasses and plants." Well, especially after my episode on ornamental grasses, that was the very first thing that came to my mind. And Patricia Chandler Newport agreed. She said definitely native grasses because of the root system to hold the soil in place. Sue Luftig and the garden blogger Gail Eichelberger also agreed. So it appears that native plants will be in Bernadette's shopping cart very soon. Will Johnson shared an interesting picture of a zinnia that he had planted, and this one produced an orange and a pink blossom on the very same plant. He wrote, "I just may have to save these seeds." Listener Sue Luftig shared a picture of the farm that's on her golf course in Delaware, Pennsylvania. I wrote Sue and said, "This looks like a little patch of heaven to me." And Sue replied, "It's so great that they use the space that would only be used for mowing as a farm." What a great idea. And then listener Edgeworth Carter wrote in and shared it was his first time growing sunflowers. And then even though something has been munching on the green leaves on the stem, the flower itself is completely intact and it's absolutely gorgeous. So congrats on your first sunflower, Edgeworth. There were a number of conversations in our group about plant IDs. Patricia Chandler Newport was carrying on a conversation that she and I had last week about deutzias. And here's what she wrote. A while back, Jennifer posted something about deutzia, and I finally found where I saw it listed as an invasive. It's just the fuzzy variety, not all deutzias. I'm sure it also depends on where one lives. This is a list from Virginia, and then she shared a great resource, but good to know they're not invasive all over. Julie Lang shared a picture of a plant, and I just kind of chuckled because I do it sometimes too when I'm taking pictures of plants. I'll put it on top of notebook paper just to show kind of the contrast and the form of the plant. And at one point, Julie had known the name of this plant, but it was slipping her mind and she needed a little bit of help. And listener Philip Busili came to the rescue and pointed out that these are bells of Ireland. Anyway, we had fun with this one. I wrote, ding, 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 plant ID. And Julie wrote, you guys are amazing. And then Patricia Chandler Newport goes, you've got to ask harder questions, Julie. Anyway, we had a little bit of fun there. And I love seeing the plant IDs roll in. It's a good mental exercise for all of us. And Julie did have one other plant ID last week, and it was for purple prairie clover. And Philip, who had helped her with the last question she had, said he had just planted a few bare roots of this plant this year. He said his plants are small with no flowers, but he's hopeful that next year they'll take off. And this is a very lovely plant. Ashley Holloway wrote in and said how much she loved it. It's very, very pretty. So look it up if you're not familiar with it. It's purple prairie clover. Check it out. Spencer Hoadley wrote in and said, I've been watching this grow over a few years at a local park, and I love it. Anybody have any idea what it might be? And lots of people jumped in to tell Spencer that what he was admiring was common trumpet vine. And then Patricia Chandler Newport cautioned, it's fairly invasive, so admire it from afar. So keep that in mind, Spencer. Spencer also wrote in with a very interesting picture. And he said, I want to make sure before I remove them, do these look like moss galls to everybody else? Moss galls are pretty strange looking if you've never seen one before. They're pink and fuzzy. They look like pinkish red little pom-poms that are often seen on roses. And as luck would have it, I stumbled on a photo that the Durham Master Gardeners had shared of a moss gall that looked almost identical to what Spencer was having on his plant. Anyway, they shared great information about this. They said galls are formed on plants as a result of chemically induced distortion of a terminal or leaf bud. The larva of this particular gall wasp will overwinter in the gall and then emerge in the spring to start the cycle again. It's pretty freaky. Alan Staley wrote in and said he had a composting question. He had just collected some fallen blooms from a jacaranda tree in the neighborhood to toss in his tumbler. They're mostly dried out, and he was wondering, is it still considered brown material? He's just trying to get the right balance. Listeners chimed in yes, and I found an answer in the garden forum. Those fallen blooms are both mulchable and compostable. They're one of the few purple flowers that will dry purple for potpourri and keep their color. And then Alan did his homework too. He wrote, after a bit more research, I both composted them and used some of them as mulch on my small community garden plot. They did have a great smell as I spread them around. Julie Mahoney wrote in and said, please help me with these things on my magnolia tree. I just came back home and found this nastiness all over my tree. They are like white blotches with pink slime inside. There are some ants on the tree too. Nothing else in my front garden has it. Just my magnolia tree. Listener Karen Johnson wrote in and said, this looks like some form of scale. And Patricia Chandler Newport confirmed it, magnolia scale. I found a great post on it from Michigan State University. And Ann Barklow wrote in and said she had had good luck with cutting out heavily infected branches and using horticultural oil to smother crawlers early on. Barb O'Brien wrote in about a problem that she was having, and it stimulated a ton of conversation in our group. Here's what she wrote. I'm having a terrible time with the deer. Today, Mom was teaching her 2 babies what was tasty in my garden. You know, like phlox, lilies, daylilies. Sheesh. Anyone found any product that works? Well, I wrote in that I use a sprinkler attached to a motion detector for my front garden, and it works great. Ann Barklow does the same thing. Jennifer Konow uses cayenne pepper mixed with water in a spray bottle. Patricia Chandler Newport wrote that she uses a motion detection sprinkler. And then we got into a conversation about which one should we purchase if we're on the market for a motion detector sprinkler. And Barklow liked the Scarecrow brand, and Patricia Chandler Newport uses the Orbit 62120 Garden Enforcer motion activated sprinkler, and it's available on Amazon. And then right at the end of this conversation, Lori Kosick wrote in, I live in the city and I need to scare off a huge groundhog demolishing my veggie garden again. Will this work for that? Now, I've never dealt with woodchucks, but Patricia Chandler Newport wrote in and said, I've had minimal luck with woodchuck using the motion sprinkler. He was small enough that it often didn't see him. For woodchucks this year, I put mesh fence around everything. It's not pretty, but at least my plants are safe. And then she wrote, so literally I am sitting here reading Lori Kosick's post about woodchuck, and one comes slamming into my back door, making the dog go wild. This woodchuck has dug himself a hole into my perennials. Anyway, Lori and Patricia will be thinking about you this week as you battle your woodchuck issue. Good luck, ladies. And then finally, listener Tanya Peel, also a blogger over at Plant and Shoot. And Tanya was featured in last week's episode for day 1 of the Garden Bloggers Fling. She shared a picture and then wrote this. I hate these worms. This is the second one I found on my tomato plants. If you see them, do you squish them or relocate them somewhere else? And boy, do you want to talk about a popular post. And I would say the responses are 50-50. People are passionate about squishing them, snipping them with pruners, throwing them in a bucket of water, feeding them to the chickens. And then on the other end of the spectrum, people were advocating for relocating them. Some put them in a distant part of their garden. Some place them on plants that they know the hornworm likes just as well as tomatoes. And many folks shared the beautiful pictures of the moth that these guys turn into. Anyway, the debate continues. And then there were a few posts that fell into the listener love category. Helen Ingham wrote, I just found your lovely podcast and joined the group. Hello from my small corner of Yorkshire, England. And then she shared pictures of her very beautiful garden. Katrina Lucier chimed in, hello from Montana. Your garden is lovely. And Danny Perkins and Debbie Gibson both welcomed Helen and loved her gorgeous garden. Then listener Bernadette Ward wrote in and said, thanks for the ad to the group. I'm restoring a homestead with 1 acre that has been abandoned for 3 years in eastern Oregon. And I wrote to her, welcome Bernadette. That was my grandmother's name, by the way, so I love that name. An abandoned acre. You've got yourself a story. Finally, listener John Murray said, I'm listening to the latest podcast in desert scrubland in Texas. Here's something from earlier today. A robber fly dining on a paper wasp in my no pesticides rose garden. Now that was an incredible image. John wrote that he noticed it while watering the roses, and the fly was kind enough to wait for him to get closer for the picture. Well, there were so many wonderful posts in the listener community for the show this week. It's just so fun to be able to interact with you and get to see posts from folks all over the globe who share our passion for gardening and have a curiosity to learn more. So come hang out with us. Don't be shy. It's really so simple to be part of the group. And I'd love for you to join for free. The next time you're in Facebook, Just type Still Growing Podcast Group into the search bar and request to join. I look forward to meeting you over in the group. Just a reminder, there's a phone number you can call if you want to get a hold of the show. It's 865-333-GROW or 865-333-4769. If you have a question or a comment or a suggestion for the show, I'd love to hear your voice. All right, now it's time for the Garden News Roundup. This is a curated group of posts and articles that I've shared over the past week with the listener community in the free Facebook group, the Still Growing Podcast Group. And it's made up of a dozen different segments, from updates on past guests to articles featuring fascinating folks in the world of horticulture that I'd love to chat with. And that's something I call the Dream Guest segment. I also cover news and information on special topic areas like sustainability and science. And then the other segments are really designed to honor the commitment of the show to helping you and your garden grow. And they are the How to DIY segment, the Continuing Ed segment, the Plant Spotlight, shopping, recipes, inspiration, and quotables. Now, what's nice about this for you is that you can stay somewhat abreast of the news in horticulture and gardening just by listening to this part of the show every week. And you can easily check out these curated articles and posts for yourself because I share it all with the listener community in the free Facebook group, the Still Growing Podcast Group. So if you hear something and want to read the full article, there's no need to take notes or track down links. Just head on over to the group and join. In the guest update segment this week, my past guest, Jen McGuinness of the blog Frau Zinnie, who also coincidentally is joining me on the program today, shared her garden chores for the month of July, and she did a great job. She does this every single month, and I love her garden chores list. And then I tell you what, something else I'm very passionate about are the blog posts about the Garden Bloggers Fling that have been written by Pam Pennick on her blog, Digging. Now, Pam was a past guest of the show on episode 555, where we talked all about her new book called The Water Saving Garden. But when Pam's not writing a book, she's writing blog posts and articles for magazines. But she has devoted a considerable amount of time putting together recaps on all of the gardens that we visited during the 2017 Garden Bloggers Fling. And if you're counting, I believe that's over 22 gardens. That's yeoman's work by Pam. She does a wonderful job, and all of the gardens that we cover in today's show are written about in detail on Pam's blog. So head on over there and check it out. You'll get a complete kick out of it, and I hope you become a raving fan of her blog. In sustainability this week, Shiat's Run shared an amazingly beautiful post simply called Picking Peas. The images were gorgeous, and I especially liked the ones showing how the peas were blanched and layered on a cookie sheet lined with parchment paper. This is done right before the peas are frozen, and they freeze their peas in gallon freezer bags. In Continuing Ed this week, I shared a post that Danger Garden wrote, simply called Less is More, and it's about editing your garden, and I loved it. And here's what I said to introduce this post to the listener community. I knew when Danger Garden wrote, "Hold on to your pants because it's about to get really crazy," that this was my kind of post. And then rounding out the Continuing Ed segment this week, blogger Janet Davis of the blog thepaintboxgarden.com wrote an epic post on Thomas Jefferson and his gardens. I thought it made for perfect July reading. In the How to DIY segment, Organic Life shared 7 tricks professional florists use to keep flowers alive for weeks. Of course, they included tips like keeping the water fresh, but also removing bruising flowers. Some flowers just don't last as long as others. So the minute you see somebody wilting off in the bunch, it's important to remove them because they can get moldy and contaminate surrounding flowers. And they also advise pinching off bruised petals. Now, this doesn't do too much to elongate the life of a flower, but it does keep your arrangement looking fresh. In the Plant Spotlight this week, I featured an article that was written by Karen Rexroad, and this post was all about the plants that were featured in the Garden Bloggers Fling. Anyway, this was a stellar post from Karen, and Karen is an extremely knowledgeable plantswoman. So if you're looking for ideas, read this post and get inspired. Then the husband and wife blogging team over at Garden in a City wrote a couple of posts that caught my attention. The first was about purple milkweed. And they wrote this post because you don't see a lot of purple milkweed in gardens, not even in native plant gardens. Anyway, Jason and Judy planted this purple milkweed in their garden back in 2015, only to have it completely disappear in 2016. And now this year, it's back in their 2017 garden. So they're having a fun time with that. And then they also shared a post, coincidentally, about a monarch, their very first monarch in their garden. That was a great post. And then finally, Gardenista shared a great post on a hardy begonia that's called Sun Shunner. This is a hardy begonia that can survive northeast winters. And Patricia Chandler Newport wrote, "Must acquire this plant." And then I wrote her back and said, "Hey, I think we're related," because I felt just as strongly about getting my hands on Sun Shunner. Check that out. In the news this week, Country Living shared 10 old-fashioned plants and flowers that Grandma always grew in her garden. This list includes some favorites like morning glory and sweet peas, 4 o'clocks, poppies, and my favorite, love in a mist. In the Dream Guest segment, masterofhort.com shared a profile piece on a gardener named John Boswell. And here's what they wrote. John is an outstanding vegetable gardener that has been growing food for over 80 years. That's not a typo. John is 92 years young, and each spring he plants and grows a garden that is bigger than most men half his age would attempt to grow. John is an organic gardener that uses barnyard waste and other organic fertilizers to improve the fertility of his soil and to help his black clay drain. Anyway, they asked John a lot of different questions, and I loved what he wrote about weed control. John does not believe in spraying herbicides to control weeds. Instead, he has set up his garden in a way that allows him to keep the weeds under control early in the season with just his hoe. As the weeds get more aggressive in the summer, he slowly lets most of them go. He believes the weeds provide shade and cooling that his late season vegetables seem to enjoy. And then here's an update on a duo that made the Dream Guest segment back in episode 571. And it's AMKK. And I started thinking about them again when Jennifer Konow shared a lovely video that she had seen on another plant page and thought she'd share it with the listener community because it was so peaceful. And when I saw AMKK in the title, I'm like, hey, I think I know those guys. And sure enough, it's the same AMKK. And the video that Jennifer shared was fabulous. It's an animation that was developed for kids, and it's called The Story of Flowers. It's wonderful. So thanks for sharing that, Jennifer. In the science segment this week, Nature.com shared a fascinating article called Plants Turn Caterpillars into Cannibals. And this was interesting because apparently there is a chemical that's produced by tomato plants in response to pest attack, and it can change the insect's behavior. It's very interesting. In shopping this week, there were 2 things that caught my attention. The first is a world clock. It's a small little desk clock, and it has 12 flat edges. So imagine a circle that has 12 flat edges and a single hour hand for the clock. Each one of those flat sides corresponds to a city, and as you roll the clock from one side to the other, the hand automatically changes its position to show the time in that location. I love this little clock. And then finally, Apartment Therapy shared 7 small, good-looking indoor composting bins for your kitchen. These were fantastic. And of course, they ranged in price from $20 to over $100. In the inspiration segment this week, there were a number of posts. The first was from Apartment Therapy, and they had written an article called What to Do If You Have Just a Little Bit of Outdoor Space. I thought there were a ridiculous amount of great ideas for small spaces in this article. Then there was a post out of Holland that showed a street that's covered with hollyhocks. This video was so fantastic. It showed hollyhocks lining both sides of the Brouwerstraat in Garnwoord, Holland. And listeners loved this video. And then there was another video that made the inspiration segment, and this was a video that was made by Blue Ridge Daylilies out of Alexander, North Carolina, just 15 minutes north of Asheville. And what this daylily operation did is fly a drone over their daylily fields. It was just beautiful, and it makes me want to get a drone. All right, in recipes this week, we have 4. So last week we didn't have any, and this week we have 4. So we're getting caught up. The first was a really fun video from the Blodgett, and it showed how to make a veggie tray that looks like an owl using your garden harvest. This one was super cute. And listener Sue Luftig wrote, I am totally doing this. And Jennifer Kono wrote, my kids would love it. And finally, Tammy Kincaid chimed in and said, I have to remember this. Don't forget, when you're on Facebook and you see a post that you love, you can always click save, and Facebook will save it in your save file for you. Botanical Interests shared a recipe for honey and orange glazed rutabaga with fresh thyme, and they featured it on their blog on a page called Seeds to Saucepan. I love that. Northwest Edible shared a fantastic recipe for a cherry salsa with tequila and cilantro. So if you grow cherries or eat cherries, you'll probably love this recipe. She gives a ton of ideas for how to use this cherry salsa as a sauce for any white meat, as a salad dressing base, as a glaze for ham, as an alternative to cranberry sauce, as a ketchup alternative for turkey, chicken, or burgers, and of course, as a marinade. And it looks fantastic too. So happy. Finally, Gardenista shared a recipe for elderflower fizz. This was in their Garden to Glass segment, and they start off their article by talking about the elderberry, and here's what they wrote. These shrubs have a reputation for being weedy. They grow fast and spread via stolons, forming dense colonies in spots they favor, especially near water. For foragers in the urban or rural wilds, this prolific habit is good news because we love the flowers, and the famous berries run a close second, at least for me. Anyway, then they shared this recipe for elderflower cordial, or a fizz, and it includes 6 ounces or 30 to 35 elderflower umbels, a pound of sugar, 6 cups of water, a half cup of lemon juice, and the zest of 4 lemons. It's that simple. It looks amazing. Finally, for this week's quotable segment, there were a number of quotes that I found on summer. Some were familiar, some were new to me. See if you recognize any. The first is by Russell Baker. Ah, summer, what power you have to make us suffer and like it. And then here's one of my favorites from Henry James. Summer afternoon, to me those have always been the 2 most beautiful words in the English language. Harriet E. Prescott wrote this in the Atlantic Monthly in August of 1865. The luxury of all summer's sweet sensation is to be found when one lies at length in the warm, fragrant grass, soaked with sunshine, aware of regions of blossoming clover and of a high heaven filled with the hum of a numerous bees. Bee lovers will love that one. And then finally, this last one by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Then followed that beautiful season, summer. Filled was the air with a dreamy and magical light, and the landscape lay as if new created in all the freshness of childhood. Well, that's the Garden News Roundup for this week's show. Just a reminder, you can get all of these posts with links and bonus content in your Facebook feed if you join the listener community in the free Facebook group, the Still Growing Podcast Group. I'd love to meet you in the group. With that, let's transition into the topic of today's show, Day 2 of the 2017 Garden Bloggers Fling. Now, today's show is the second in a 3-part series featuring the 2017 Garden Bloggers Fling held in and around Washington, D.C. Now, for today's show, I'm so excited to be joined by fellow garden bloggers, Beth Billstrom of the blog More Than Oregano, Jen McGuinness of the blog Frau, Zinnie, and Tracy Blevins of PlantsMap. In today's episode, we'll be reviewing Day 2 of the 2017 Garden Bloggers Fling, and Day 2 was focused on gardens in the suburbs of D.C. So we'll be reviewing wonderful private gardens in areas like Bethesda, Arlington, Tyson's Corner, and Great Falls. Now, some of these gardens are from private homeowners with a passion for gardening, while others are the personal gardens created by professional landscape designers. So it's a treat to see the gardens that they nurture for themselves. We also stopped at Brookside Gardens. This is a park in Montgomery County. Beth, Jen, Tracy, and I had a fun time reliving our tours on Day 2 and chatting about all of these wonderful gardens. Well, hello, ladies. Welcome to our little Garden Blogger Fling Day 2 reunion.
Hey, Jennifer. How you doing?
Hi, Jennifer.
How are you?
I'm good. All right, you guys, before we get started, why don't I have each of you take a moment to introduce yourself, tell us your name, the name of your blog, where you're from, the zone you're in, how many flings you've been to, and then anything else you want to tell us about yourself.
I am Tracy Blevins with plantsmap.com. That's the name of the website that I started with my partner and spouse, Bill Blevins. It's a website that I use to help document about plants that I'm growing, and it turned into be a tool that a lot of people could use and public gardens could use to document about what they're growing. Our tagline is connecting people with plants, and it has a lot of different meanings, and we didn't realize how many different meanings until we started getting different types of users and different type of circumstances. We started it because it was sort of our own need to help document and keep a plant list of the plants that we were growing in our garden. And I'm a master gardener, a background in cooperative extension. So I like to share information with people, and I like it to be real information and useful. And so it was built as a tool for people to document the plants in their landscape. And so they can do plants and they can do collections. And you can use it in a lot of different ways. You can just use it for the photo gallery aspect on a collection, which is what I've done for the Garden Bloggers Fling landscapes that we visited. But we find that people who have gravitated to using us tend to have an educational outreach mission. So it's a lot of public landscapes as well as individuals, but a lot of public landscapes that want to help teach people through their plants. And so one of the tools are interactive tags that we have. So if somebody visits Lady Park Arboretum, for example, in Virginia, the tags and the website kind of act as a digital docent for these open landscapes where they don't have people there all the time. There isn't a gate. There isn't somebody there telling people about what they do. So it's both for individuals and public landscapes if you just want to keep a digital plant journal. And it's cloud-based so that, it's really useful for public landscapes to help share with their volunteers, their staff, people visiting the garden, and to get people to come visit those landscapes as well.
Okay, that's very intriguing. I love that whole digital docent. That's amazing. That's great.
Right. So if you come to visit the site, it's totally open and it is a mobile site. So it works on a smartphone, a tablet, or a computer. And the Explore and the Map page is open for anybody to just explore. And you're basically looking at either individuals' plant collections or you're looking at public landscapes and plant collections that you can go visit. And some of them are very unique. We have attracted a lot of nature centers, environmental centers, university landscapes, arboretums, and even corporate landscapes. I currently live in Virginia, which is Zone 7A. I've gardened in Illinois, where I grew up. I lived in Alabama, and that's where I first became a master gardener in 2004, and then moved to New York and became a master gardener there. And I'm currently a master gardener now in Virginia. My garden style is kind of I've always liked woodland gardens. So everywhere I've lived, I realized that I always kind of gravitate to a woodland garden type of environment. But my husband, Bill, he got into conifers a couple of years ago. And so we kind of have a his and her landscape. So the back is a kind of a woodland garden and the front is a conifer garden. And we kind of have a pollinator strip area that we kind of do together. I don't have kids, but we do have 2 border collies. And they say that's like living with 5-year-olds. So, and I can say that that's absolutely true.
I love it. I love it. Beth, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, my name is Beth Billstrom, and my blog is called More Than Oregano. And I've been on that blog for about 5 years. Did a couple of other blogs before that, so probably my total time blogging has probably been around 8 years or so. On More Than Oregano, my goal is to inspire gardeners to garden, whether you're a new gardener or experienced gardener. I focus mainly on smaller gardens. I've always gardened in more of a city-type lot, and so we do all kinds of fun things from giving tips to sharing inspiring photography. We have a monthly newsletter where my readers can partake in giveaways and discounts. It's really fun. I enjoy More Than Oregano a lot. It's a great creative outlet for me. I also sell my photography and do write professionally. So all of that kind of comes together on More Than Oregano, and I just really enjoy that. I operate from Minnesota right now, so I'm in Zone 4B. I really enjoy tours, so this was my second year attending the Garden Fling. Last year, it was right here in Minnesota, so it was just an easy way to start out going to the fling, and it was a great time. And then we found out it was in D.C., so I went there this year, and it was an equally great time. See, I am married. I've been married for 28 years, and we have 3 kids who are now living in 3 different states, and so we get to travel quite a bit to visit them. We have a little dog, Fred. My garden kind of surrounds my entire house. So although it's a small garden, it does have a lot to it. On the one side, I do a lot of vertical gardening with vegetables as well as herbs. Right now I'm growing 8 different varieties of tomatoes vertically, and squash and beans and all of that. So it's very colorful. And I have a pollinator garden. I have a rose garden, shrub garden. Then on the other side, we just made this like a barbecue porch with a pergola. So there's always, even though it's a small space, there's always something new. My patio is filled with different containers. I love doing container gardening.
I love the whole barbecue porch. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's a great place. You know, we used to barbecue right on our patio, but it was actually right under my living room window, so I kind of got a little tired of all that smoke coming in. And also we had a little trouble with the wind, you know, trying to keep our barbecue lit. So we did it like just in that little section that people often have where their garage ends, but their house is still there. It's like a, you know, like a kind of a little inset area. So we made this little porch. Yeah. So it's great. We started with the porch and laid the patio bricks. And then I said, you know, I think I need a structure for that. So then we build the pergola. And so Mark has his grill. That's my husband. He has his grill there. And we have hydrangeas and all different things growing around it and trellises. So it's really fun.
I love it. I love it. All right, Frau Zinnie. Jen, you're next.
Hi, my name is Jen McGuinness, and my blog is frauzinnie.com. I've been blogging since 2011. I like to interview garden experts and share my own gardening experiences. One of my favorite parts of the blog is this feature that I do on Fridays called Floral Friday, where I highlight what's blooming in the garden or what's growing, depending on the fruit trees or the vegetables. So this is like a really great outlet for me. I'm a writer and a photographer. I am officially trained as a journalist, but I recently switched gears and I just received my teaching certification for early childhood education, which I'm super excited about. I'm originally from New York, but I followed my husband to Connecticut. So now I garden in Zone 6B. This is my first fling, and I'm already trying to figure out how to get to the next one. And I am married for 11 years. I don't have any kids, but I have 2 house rabbits, Max and Jack. My garden is divided into 2 sections. So when you first come over, there's the front garden, which faces the street, and it's jam-packed with perennials, fruit trees, bushes, annuals, some vegetables. And then the back garden is more of a challenge because there are black walnut trees, which play a major role in deciding what I can actually grow back there. And we have reached this peaceful coexistence. I have a new appreciation for hostas as a result.
There's always a silver lining.
Yep, definitely.
Well, ladies, day 2 featured 6 private gardens. Day 2 was designed to start taking us out of the city and moving into more of the suburbs of DC. So we began by driving out to Bethesda, Maryland, to our very first private garden, a major big score for the Fling itinerary, I might add. This was the garden of landscape designer Barbara Katz, the owner of London Landscapes. Now, Barbara created this lushly planted hillside garden. The lot slopes 12 feet up to the property line near a 200-year-old oak. A waterfall and small pond make use of the slope, attracting birds and wildlife. And the garden is filled with annuals and perennials. However, the garden has a strict color division with plants in tones of orange, white, and purple on one side and yellow, pink, blue, and maroon on the other. This garden had quite the wow factor. That said, when I got back home last week, I was shopping and, of course, can't get enough of looking at gardens. And so I bought a garden publication and I open it up and I'm looking at this garden going, oh, this looks familiar. And sure enough, it was Barbara Katz's garden. Tracy, why don't you share your thoughts on this amazing private garden?
Yeah, I have to say, making the transition that day to this one, this was the first private landscape we went to, and it was wow. Like, oh my gosh, let me take all of this in. I'm, kind of looking back through my photos and then, listening to your description of it. And yeah, I would describe it as like a confetti garden, but all the confetti fell perfectly in place to make this beautiful mosaic. And her story about how I didn't catch it all, but I believe this was one of her clients' landscapes. And she had lovingly poured her heart into it. And then they were selling the house and she got to buy the house and the landscape. It was just a gorgeous garden from the street to all the way around the back. And at the street, one of my favorite combos there was the yellow yarrows with the purple agastache. That was just beautiful. And then as you walk around the back, I think I took your picture with a really tall lily. I'm going to guess it is an Orient pet lily because you're 6 feet tall, right?
Yes.
And I'm like, this lily, you're looking up at this lily, right? In her side garden there.
Yes.
Every piece of this landscape was meticulously placed with plants and definitely a mixture of plant collector plants and just well-designed placement of these colors. And one of my other favorite combinations was there was a really hot pink echinacea coneflower with some coleus that was chartreuse with that hot pink in it as well behind it. And then kind of the central focal point was that beautiful waterfall and koi pond in the back on that slope situated with conifers and grasses. It was just a wow from the beginning. It was like, oh, wow. this is going to be an impressive day because we're starting off with this. You realize, wow, this is going to be some impressive gardens because this one really just knocked our socks off, I think, at the beginning.
Yes.
I think it was just so amazing, too, when you talk with Barbara. One, she's just so humble, but she really has just poured so much of herself into this. She is the primary keeper of the garden, too, maintenance person. Tracy said that it goes up the slope, but it's all plants except for a circle of lawn. And there's a gentleman who mows the lawn. But other than that, Barbara does all the maintenance in this garden herself. She doesn't hire it out. She does it herself. And the plants are layered just so perfectly. I was looking at them and I'm wondering, how does she maintain this? Does she use some long tool, Does she use a hoe? How does she do that? And she said, no, that she has the garden dance down.
Wow.
She goes in there and she just knows precisely where to stop and where not to stop. So she doesn't smush any of her flowers. That's just as skillful as it is to be able to select all those flowers and plant all those flowers, to be able to maintain it at the level that she does while she's still working and designing other gardens. I have, Instagrammed it, and just because you just keep coming back to it. It was the layering of colors. It had just rained that evening before, so I think everything just felt that freshness. The leaves just kind of glistened with some of the raindrops on them, and you came around the corner when the side yard was just lush and green, and it kind of came over you, so you felt like you were just walking through this lush green tunnel, and then you open up into this, you kind of just wanted to sing because the colors were just so vibrant, and the waterfall was coming down and you could hear it, and you just kind of felt like the world was just going to open up and start singing in the middle of this garden. It was really incredible.
Yeah, it was amazing. I think that was one of my favorite ones on the whole trip. And I remember spending more time in the front garden at first because it took a while for all of us to make our way into the back. And I was like, that's okay. They can go in the back and I'll just take pictures out front. So I'm like taking my time. And then I came around the corner and it was just amazing. Like you just turn the corner and it was like entering another world. Like you had no idea from the front of the road. You could go back there and it's like a whole other world. And just the way she used her space, like she fit all, like a whole bus of us up there. She had a gazebo. She had a cascading like waterfall into the pond with the koi. She had so many different plants going on. And then she also had all these like many little details so that no matter where you looked, there was something for your eye to catch. Like it could have been like the stone lizard on the rocks, or there was up at the very top of the garden where it sloped upward, there was this little birdhouse hanging in the tree. And the birdhouse was simple, but the way it complemented the leaves of the tree, and it was just beautiful. Like it's like the type of garden that you dream about, and you open a magazine and you go, oh yeah, I would like that. That would be my garden.
Absolutely. I always get irritated with gardens that are this good because I spend so much time just going from the front to even the side. I barely make it to the back, and then it's time to go. And there was just so much to take in. I kind of get lost. I wasn't very strategic about how I was using my time at these gardens this year. And that's one of my big takeaways is that next year, I want to do a better job of getting my butt through those gardens so that I can see everything instead of getting, stuck, on the side garden. I did start out just by happenstance and spoke to Barbara's husband, who told me that he does all the containers. So that's his contribution to the garden is he does all of those wonderful containers, lots of succulents. He loves to work with succulents. I thought that was great. Jen, I was so glad that you brought up the lizard. Barbara had this lizard that was placed on a rock. She didn't have a ton of garden art, but she had a few very tastefully placed items in her garden. And when I came up that waterfall and saw that lizard, I'm like, seriously, this woman places things to perfection. I mean, he looked like he could have been alive, like come to life. It was amazing. And that waterfall really reminded me of the Japanese waterfall in the Japanese garden at Hillwood. And just like Hillwood, she was smart because she designed it so you could experience it from every angle. You could be at the very top, you could be at the bottom, you could venture up the side of it. It was just so well done. I really loved this garden.
Did we all take a picture of the lizard? Because
Oh, I'm sure.
we all took a picture of the lizard.
I was just looking at Pam Pennick's blog. It's hot off the press. She had just released this post about 5 hours ago. And of course, there's a picture of that lizard. I tell you what. Yep, she got it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just a perfect garden, I feel like.
Yeah, it was really perfection.
Yeah, it was. Everything was just really placed so very well.
You know, I don't know if you guys noticed, but right as you were coming in, I didn't notice until I was leaving, but right as you were coming in, as you turned the corner to go into that magnificent backyard, she had placed a bird bath. I'm telling you, it was everything around it was perfectly framing it. It was unbelievable, from the trees to the plants around the base of it. I'm just looking at it going, oh my gosh, I don't need to do a thing. I just have to hit click on my phone. It was perfect.
I know. It was just really amazing. I'm just kind of mesmerized here as I'm flipping through my own pictures, and you see these huge hostas, that just kind of frame the walkway, and they do exactly what they're supposed to do, that they just come over the stone and just soften the stone a little bit. Everybody else is like, we're just trying to get our hostas to grow a lot of times, and not have anything eat at them, Yes. I'm looking at my picture, I'm like these leaves, they're perfect, nothing's eating them.
No,
so yeah, it was really, just the flowers, and it's just too. What I think is very interesting is that she uses both annuals and perennials together very seamlessly. That can be kind of a hard thing to do. I know in my garden that my annuals, if I plant my annuals in the ground, because there's so much clay in my soil, that it really takes a lot longer for my annuals to get going. But she plants her annuals right alongside, her perennials, and everything is growing very well. She told me that she no longer uses leaf mold, but I believe she said she used plant vines. And I kept saying, what? Because I had never heard of that. So I had meant to go and double check and see exactly what she's doing, but she doesn't use leaf mold anymore. She told me she had put on so much leaf mold that she actually changed the pH factor in her soil.
Oh my gosh.
And so she was looking at other nutrients and ways to fortify her soil. So, and I'm sure that has got to be a very big foundational structure of her garden, because everything is plants, and she keeps it going. It looks like every year. I mean, it doesn't look like there's a section that rests. She must really, have a good handle on what is happening in her soil.
There was something else that she had done, and I think the only reason I was able to process what I was seeing is I had gotten all the way up to that gazebo, and my arm was kind of getting tired. It was kind of pooped out from the previous day. So I knew that on this particular day, I needed to take it easy. So when I saw that gazebo, I made my way all the way up there, and then I just sat down on the front step of the gazebo, and I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at the pavers, the stone that she had for all of the walkway, and then what she had growing in between, because it wasn't just moss and other traditional things that you would think of as ground cover. She even had little heuchera that were just kind of all throughout there. I mean, she unabashedly put things that you would not consider ground cover and had them intermingled with the ground covers. And the whole point was just cover this thing. And granted, they weren't growing too robustly. Maybe they were smaller varieties, but I think it was the shade also in that area that stunted how their form was going to ultimately turn out. So she had a lot of things going on there. There was just so much in terms of plant material.
Yeah, there was a lot. But there were just some good takeaways from her garden. One of the biggest takeaways that I took from her garden, as far as what I might do on mine, is her front yard is somewhat sloped, and that is what mine is as well. And right now, I have an area right by my front door that is landscaped, and I do like it. But I would like to, at some point, do more in the front yard. And she handled her her street side so well. Her garden does go down to the street, except rather than taking it all the way down to the curb, where anybody who's ever tried to garden your front garden like that knows, if you live in any type of winter climate, that, as soon as the snow comes and the plow and the sand and salt or whatever your city uses, that first foot of your garden is just toast.
Yep.
There's nothing that's going to grow there. And so she actually put stonework there. It looks like it's got to be, I think it was a good 2 feet of stonework. And then she put a small kind of ironwork fence. And then she started her garden. And it looked well. It looked good. You could walk through it. And I'm sure it was a great way to guard her garden during the winter months. And I hadn't really seen anyone do that before. And I thought that is something that I'm going to put in my garden. I thought it was just really genius.
You're right.
Those are like designers they've done it. They've done it, they've seen it, they've tried it, and they're like, oops, that doesn't work. I need to change that. And so I think that's one of the best things that I get from going to the Fling is that you're learning from their experience, basically.
Yes.
That's what you're doing.
Yes.
And it's just, great takeaways.
Yes. The other thing, when I was talking to her husband in that front garden, I have a locust tree in my front garden and they have a locust tree. So that was, I think, the first thing that we started talking about. And he said, well, dappled sun, as he was talking about this tree, or dappled shade. And I was like, oh, you're so right. I never thought about my locust tree in those terms before, because I do push the boundary a little bit about what I can plant underneath mine in the same way that they had done. I just hadn't thought about why is that working so much. So just, they have so many things that they've been perfecting this garden, and I just loved their insight.
Beautiful. They had that like stonework surrounding the small part of the lawn.
Yes.
And then like the steps, and you had mentioned how there were things like growing in the cracks, and one of the plants growing in the crack was a lady's mantle. Like I never would have thought to use that in that instance,
Yes.
Yeah. And that stone wall also had moss coming out of it and ferns coming out of it. So, yeah.
Hey, Beth, when you wrote your first post on containers, did you get a lot of them from Barbara's garden?
The feature photo is definitely from Barbara's. I think there's 3 of them. There's one with succulents that is from her garden. Actually, 2, I think, that have succulents from her garden. They were just tucked in so nicely on those steps going up the slope that a lot of times, if you put something on a stair like that, when there's so much else going on, you kind of miss it or you might trip over it, but it was just done so well. All the containers throughout the tour. I mean, I was just amazed at all the different things that and ways people put together a container. They went way beyond spiller, thriller, filler.
Yes.
They did. They just went way beyond that.
Well, and the thing about Barbara Katz's containers too is they weren't all matchy-matchy. A lot of times you're in a garden that's so coordinated, so thought out, and then all the containers match. They're all terracotta or they're all a certain color. Barbara's weren't, and yet everything was pulled together.
Yeah, that's really cool.
All right, let's transition to Debbie Friedman's garden. Debbie's garden was inspired with elements from nature used as art or functional pieces. Logs were made into benches. Log slices were used as patios. Willow is grown to weave into balls. Granite stones from vacations are interspersed into the front walkway, and log hollow slices are set on their side for your own interpretation. Debbie is also a landscape designer and owner of Bethesda Garden Design. Beth, what were your thoughts on this garden?
I love this garden, and going from Barbara's garden to Debbie's garden, I thought was just so smart. Debbie Friedman's garden was much more natural. And when you saw Debbie, you're like, of course. Who else could have designed this garden but you? She looked like she just fit exactly into her garden. She herself seemed very kind of artsy and very free-flowing. I really enjoyed this garden in a very different way than I enjoyed Barbara's garden. There was a lot more natural kind of art pieces, like she said, based on logs or twigs. She had this clematis that just climbed right up into her patio. And it was just more of slower, more natural feel to it. The back garden was very woodsy. I loved the fountain that she had right outside. She had a flagstone patio with this fountain, and then you would go upstairs to her deck, and very simplistic. I just really enjoyed it.
I agree that it was a really nice change from Barbara's garden because there were details in Debbie's garden that fit her. Like, she was presented with this property that had the bamboo growing, and instead of like really fighting it, she like ended up using it to like her advantage. Like, she cut it and made like a varied fence that like swirled around the back of the garden, and then like it just played with like the texture of it all, and it interweaved with the hollowed out logs. And then she used these log slices for the pathways in certain parts. Like, she carried that wooden theme throughout the garden, where she had like these 3 big willow spheres of different sizes in the lawn on one side. And then it looked like if you were standing there looking at those and you turned your body, you would see like a driftwood. I'm guessing it was driftwood sphere also. So it was like just tying in all these like wooden elements, which I'm thinking is how she wanted to tie in the main theme. She just did a really nice job using the natural materials. It was very sunny in the front, but in the back she had this nice shady area where it was very cool, and she had a lot of ferns that she had just put in. She had hanging lanterns. It was just a picnic table, and that's I like that pop of color. She had this standard picnic table that you would just, find anywhere. She painted it red. She like took out part of the top of the table, but then it looked like she planted like a little mossy plant there, and then she had like a bird's nest fern, I believe, growing on the other side, and it was just really nicely done.
And she did say when she welcomed us, this is Tracy, she said she wanted it to have elements of where some of her favorite places were, which were in the Cape Cod type gardens, and the front of her landscape was very the house, the style of the house, and the style of the gardens, and the fence and the hydrangeas in the front was very much a Cape Cod type theme. But I do think there was a transition when you went beyond that side gate. There was this transition to the backyard, which up near and around the house was still sort of that Cape Cod style of plant material. But that back corner, that shade corner, just really captivated me because, again, like Jen said, she had this bamboo border back there, and I'm not sure if she put it in, the neighbors put it in. I'm not sure who came first, but that was almost like a memorial to me. It was so different and such a reflective spot. And to me, I wanted there to be interpretive signage there to explain. It was like a piece of art to me because the way she placed those shade plants and the logs and had done the bamboo and the fence. I don't know if you've ever seen the World War I memorial, but the plants appeared to be approaching you, like they were marching towards you. And I wondered if that was a statement about the bamboo or something, but it was bamboo, then the ferns, but they were placed in a staggered pattern where they were coming towards you. And then it transitioned to the next line of troops, which was, I think it was a wood rush. And then they're kind of gradually coming towards you. Very heavy shade there. It was like something you would see at a public landscape, like you would see at a memorial. It was very reflective to me. There was a message there, I thought. And I thought it was very, very interesting. That part of the garden kind of captivated me. I wanted to learn more about what was the meaning here. It's what it felt like to me.
I love the fact that you talked about the memorial aspect to it. And it was so captivating that that's all the further I got. That's all the further I got was into that corner. And then it was time to go. And the one thing I did do, though, is I did approach her because so many people were commenting on the bamboo. And I wanted to know, what's the deal here? Did you plant this? And then, it's right on the property line. So, of course, that impacts the neighbors who also have to then address the fact that there's bamboo coming up on the other side of the fence. So I said, did you plant this? How did this come to be? And she's like, no, this was here. This big grove of bamboo was here when we moved in. And so she said, what we've gotten very good at is in the spring, we head to that back corner and we just step on the new shoots. We bend them over with our feet and we step on them, and that snaps them off, and that prevents any new bamboo from growing. And so that's how she was able to somewhat contain and control that. But yeah, you're exactly right. It was the Korean War Memorial is the one I think you're talking about, Trace. And I had, that was my exact reaction to that memorial. When I walked up on the backside of that, we had a tour guide. And then that ended up being my absolute favorite thing that I saw in DC when I went with my family. I loved that memorial. But that corner, definitely the way you described it, spot on.
Mm-hmm. Right. It was like movement captured, like the movement. And maybe that's how she felt towards the bamboo, right? Like it's moving forward. I'm going to push it back. Right. So.
Yep. You know, the other thing, God bless Pam Pennick, because I tell you what, does anybody capture all of the gardens of the Fling in the way that Pam does? She does such a comprehensive job. But one of the things I appreciate about Pam, too, is she is able to sleuth down almost every mystery of these gardens that we go to. And one that I had was, I don't know if you remember this, but when we passed through the fence to get from the front yard to the backyard, there were these columnar trees. I didn't know what they were. And they were and there were like two, one on either side of the fence, and then there was one by the house. So they were kind of like these sentinels dividing the front yard from the backyard. And of course, coming from Minnesota, I didn't know what they were because we don't have anything like that here. And here's what Pam wrote. She said, heading around to the back garden, you pass through an inviting picket fence with interesting columnar sweet gum trees on either side of the gate. So there's sweet gum trees. Thank you, Pam Pennick.
Wow. Yeah, I remember those trees, but I didn't know that that's what they were. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Hey, so none of you guys made it up onto the deck there and see the succulent centerpiece there? Did anyone see that? Because Helen and I were looking at that, and we were both taking pictures of it, and it's this beautiful centerpiece. And actually, I did put it in my post, but I don't know what the succulents are growing out of, and I wasn't able to get around to ask her. And I was wondering if anybody else knew what that was.
Pam Pennick wrote about it.
Did Pam? I haven't seen Pam's post.
Yeah.
What did she say?
Here's
what did she say it was?
Here's what she wrote. And it was so fun to see because I didn't get up onto the porch. So when I read your post, Beth, and I saw that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that. And now
cool?
It was totally cool. And here it is in Pam's. And here's what Pam wrote. On a dining table, tillandsias and succulents are tucked into what looks like a cluster of seed pods. That was her guess. And that's what it looks like.
What does she think it is?
A cluster of seed pods.
Of seed pods. Right. But what type of seed pods? So I'm going to find out. I am, because that's the big mystery. I think I'm going to contact our friend Debbie. And I just loved it. I thought it was just really, really wonderful.
After Debbie's, we traveled to Brookside Gardens for a tour and lunch. With its colorful plantings, shimmering ponds, and breathtaking landscapes, Brookside Gardens is often described as the jewel of Montgomery County parks. The gardens were founded in 1969 and named for the winding brooks and streams that surrounded this extraordinary public display garden. Brookside Gardens hosts annual ticketed events. There is this amazing exhibit called Wings of Fancy live butterfly and caterpillar exhibit. So you get to go into this enclosure and have butterflies all around you. And when I was checking on this website to get ready for this episode, I noted that on their website, they said, due to extreme heat conditions inside the conservatory, Wings of Fancy will be closing July 11th through the 13th. So isn't that interesting? We got lucky because if we'd have had extreme heat, we would not have been able to go in there. Ladies,
it was hot.
Yeah, it was hot. It was plenty hot. Ladies, what did you think of this particular garden?
All right. I loved all the gardens. I'm going to sound like a broken record. I loved it. But, I think we did 22 gardens. What did you do? Oh, I loved them. I loved them all, and they're just all so very different. This is a public garden. You walk in and it's just so fun because you walk right into the children's garden. Most public gardens don't do that. Most public gardens put their children's garden, they kind of bury it, somewhere around. But you walk into just this lovely kind of old-fashioned looking themed type of garden that's just so well kept, and it's got little schoolhouse buildings and interactive displays for the kids. And whoever designed that, I think, is so smart because, for a family to come, boom, their kids are engaged right away. Everything is down for their level. They can touch, they can see, they can smell. And it's not, where you're not towing the kids all the way through the garden before the kids get to what they like. They're engaged in it right away. And that is good because the butterfly garden was quite a little hike through the garden, which was fine with me. I was fine with that. But I think it was really nice that kids would have something right up front to engage with. So I went through that display, and then I headed right to the butterfly garden because I think this was the only one of our 22 gardens that had such a feature. And I've been in a lot of different butterfly gardens, and this one was really tops in my book, mainly because the butterflies looked so healthy. There were so many different types. There were zinnias and colors all over the place. One thing that I meant to talk about is that as you're waiting to get into the butterfly thing, they have something there for you as well where you can look at the different caterpillars, and the kids can get right up close to them and take all the different pictures that they want to, or just, watch them. And so that's engaging. You're not just sitting there twiddling your thumbs. There's really learning going on. But the zinnias inside I thought were so colorful. The painted ladies and the different moths that they had. It was just, they were just flying everywhere and landing on everybody, and you can just see the kids having so much fun. So I don't know. I thought it was a great garden.
One of the things that I really liked about this garden, this is Tracy with Plants Map again. This is a public garden. I believe that admission is free to this garden. This is a part of the Montgomery Parks, recreational parks. It's in Wheaton, Maryland, I believe. Brookside Gardens. And I love public gardens, and I love public gardens that have an real educational mission to them. And what I found, I took a lot of pictures of and really liked was the AAS display garden that was there. There was a beautiful All-American Selections display garden. They had drifts of these new petunias and new annuals and even some edibles mixed in there. And if you're not familiar with what AAS is, it's an independent organization that trials new flower and edible varieties, and they use trial gardens to do that. And then the winners become AAS winners. And then there are landscapes like this one that have display gardens of the AAS winners. So it's very educational that you can go and you can see these plants that have been put through these rigors. I mean, these trial gardens, they do nothing to them. They put them in these strips, and they have a very regimented way of a little bit of water, a little bit of attention. They don't pamper them. So the plants have to tough it out, and they have to earn their award. So I think it's awesome to see these display gardens. It helps people learn about really good varieties that you can grow in your home garden that are going to meet, your challenges that you have. I did a collection of Brookside on Plants Map under their Garden Bloggers Fling collection, and you can see display garden as well as some of the other gardens there. I mean, there was an aquatic garden, there was an azalea garden. The children's garden was amazing. The rose garden, a Japanese garden, trial, and they had a sign about their trial garden that was there even before the AAS garden. So, and it talked about the relationship with the community and the support of the community. I really liked the trial garden and the display garden.
I'm going to jump in too about the whole educational aspect. I thought that they did a really nice job of that. There was one area before we got to the butterfly area, and it was a bed, and they had a sign there labeled color science, and they had a little visual of the color wheel and how the color wheel can be used to help design gardens and create garden the color harmony by using I'm probably going to say it wrong, triadic colors. And those are the ones that they call it naturally pleasing to the eye. And then they say they're 3 evenly spaced colors on the color wheel that create a perfect triangle. So for their example, they had like orange, purple, and green. And then they were saying like that's the reason why you walk into an area and you think all the plants just look perfect and just right. It's because they're using that color wheel in that manner. And I never really thought about it. Like, you can open up garden books and they'll tell you like, oh, you should look at the color wheel. You should know who plays well with each other. But I never really thought about it more than that. And it was just a very nice, small, like sample sign. It got the point across, and I walked away and I was like, oh, I get it now. And I thought that was great. And then they had they called it the Evening Affair Garden, which featured white zinnias. So that was, of course, a win with me because I love zinnias. And then I liked how they used tall verbena around the rectangular fountains. And they
wasn't that gorgeous?
Yeah, like I never would have thought.
I have a beautiful picture. I'm sorry, but I have a beautiful picture of that with the water and the jugs and just looking through the purple verbena. I'm like, oh, who did this? This is stellar.
Yeah. It was brilliant. And like
it was.
The best part about it is like when that like pops up in my yard, I just let it go. I'm like, okay, you want to grow there? That's cool. But the way they did it, like it looks like there's this like tufted grass on the bottom, like almost out of like a Dr. Seuss book.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got these tall, skinny spikes of the purple flower coming out. And it just was like, wow, like, like I have so many pictures of the purple verbena. Like,
I know.
I don't know what else I might have missed. I totally didn't get into the kids' garden, but I have the tall verbena. And then, like, of course, the butterfly house is amazing. And I was super excited that a butterfly landed on my hat. And thankfully, the only reason why I even knew it happened was because my friend Angie from the Freckled Rose was with me. And she was like, oh, don't move. Let me take your picture. And then she had me like carefully move my head down and have the butterfly get its picture taken. And then there were a couple on me when I was trying to leave. They had to like brush them off.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. It was a very nice combination. I wish we had a little bit more time there because there was just so much that was offered that, I mean, you could easily spend a day there.
Yeah.
Right. Easily.
I loved all the posts that the gardeners were sharing. They were taking selfies there. I saw Jen's post with the butterfly in her hat. Tanya Peel took a picture of Dee Nash. She had a butterfly in her hair. It was cute. Brandon Coppin did a selfie video showing all the butterflies around him. It was just really,
cool.
Yeah, it was just really a super fun place to be. And then I loved in that children's garden, they had all of these little arbors that looked like the outline of a schoolhouse. And that's basically what you were passing through. And then at the very top, they had these chalkboards. They looked like chalkboards, and they used signage that echoed chalkboard font. And then they put a variety of different quotes in those. And one of them that I really liked was from Frank Lloyd Wright. It said, "Study nature, love nature, stay close to nature. It will never fail you." And so they had a lot of just sweet little sayings like that as you went through that schoolyard garden. I really liked that.
Really wonderful.
Yeah. Well, next up is Jeff Minnick's garden. Now, Jeff Minnick is a garden designer and the owner of Jeff Minnick Garden Design. Jeff specializes in creating special outdoor havens for his clients, an integration of indoor and outdoor living, a refuge that reflects who you are, and a place where you can truly be yourself. And this was very apparent when we visited Jeff's garden. Jeff's gardens concentrate on texture, color, and materials that enhance the senses. Now, when Jeff's working for his clients, his work is most often rustic and woodsy, with a sense of order, progression, and natural beauty. Jeff's personal woodland garden had a southern flair. Jeff's peaceful garden was rich in plants with a variety of colors, scents, and textures. A waterfall guided the bloggers toward a sloping, shady garden, lush with evergreen and deciduous shrubs. This garden was a standout in my mind for so many reasons. What did you gals think?
I love this garden. I love that there was so much variety for a shady garden, because I feel like people are like, oh, I have shade. And then, the conversation ends there. And people who give up on gardening because of the shade need to visit Jeff's garden, because like it became such a back burner thing. Like you weren't thinking, oh, this is all in the shade. You were thinking like, oh my gosh, look how he used this space to make it work. Like, first of all, he has I feel like he would have a very challenging property to work with, because when we were on that lower level in the garden, when you finally descend down and you look to your right, you could see the neighbor's property, and it was just a straight shot down, like a total almost, 75-degree angle slope. And to think that, he took a look at that land and was able to craft a staircase into there, put a waterfall that leads you to that staircase to make you go down to that lower level. Like, that's just, to me, it was brilliant. And I think I walked around with my mouth hanging open the whole time, because I was just taking it all in. And to me, I feel like if you close your eyes and you think of a secret garden, Jeff's garden is going to be really close to what pops up in your mind, because it just felt like a big hub, from the trees above. And then he just had so many different layers. Like, you could tell he was a collector, because he had so many different quirky things. Like, there was a whole fence post where it was broken statues, but the only part of the statue that was up there was the heads, which was oh, okay, that's kind of weird. But then up in the pond, he had, I got really excited about this. He had one of the RCA nipper dogs, which is back with the RCA, the Victor Petrolo, his master's voice signage. And that was just sitting up there with the pond. And to me, it was wow, it's really cool. There's a nipper dog. And then it was right across from the frog. And then, he had Spanish moss hanging from tree branches. He incorporated it into his window boxes in the front and containers. And in those window boxes, he had spider plants, which, to me, it was total mind blowing. I was like, I never thought to put a spider plant outside. And I know that's kind of silly to say, but I never thought to put them outside, because to me, houseplants always had their own place in the home. And, they could go out on the patio in the summer and, maybe enjoy some of the heat, but they ultimately stayed in the kitchen, stayed in the living room. And the fact that he was taking spider plants, planting them in outside planters just blew my mind. And I was like, oh, I never even thought of that. And it just made me think about all the other house plants or the tropicals that, can't survive outside, that could be used as an annual almost in the window boxes and containers. Just, I'm looking through my photos, because there was so much to take in with his too. He had a lot of accents with begonias. It was the wax begonias, the tuberous begonias. He had hydrangeas that could tolerate the shade. There's just so much. In the introduction, you had said that he had a little bit of that southern flair, and I recognized that picturesque statue from the book cover, The Garden of Good and Evil, where it's that girl holding the two plates, and she's just I think in the book it's from the cemetery down there, but he had one of those surrounded by seashells on the wall. And the way he had everyone move through his garden was very deliberate. We were forced to kind of line up single file, make our way past the waterfall feature and down the staircase into the lower part of the shade garden. And it was just really nicely done. And it made me rethink about how I could better use my shady spots in my own garden. And I think he just did a brilliant job. I think I loved it. Can you tell?
Yeah, he really did. I mean, it was an experience of foliage is what it was. You know, where Barbara Katz's, I think what caught all of us was the color.
Yeah.
Definitely there was foliage, but it was color, and it was color used well. And he was able to do with foliage what Barbara did with, I think, color and flower, where he even said that. And when we got there, he said he liked foliage, and it wasn't about the flowers, it was about the foliage. And he just layered his foliage, the different leaves and the ferns and the hydrangea and the boxwoods, and he just layered them. And so as you were like going down, 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 that's kind of what it felt like. You were going down into this layered tapestry of foliage, and then you walked the length of the backyard, and then you were ready to come back up, and then you made your ascent back up to land level. It was really just an experience.
Yeah, I think this is Tracy again. If I were to describe it, I would say it was 50 shades of green, right? It was, and I think it had to do with the season that we were seeing it, because it was very lush, but like Beth said, you didn't feel like a jungle. It was very lush, and it was definitely a very challenging slope. And you could really see it, like Jen said, when you looked over at the neighbor and they had nothing, and you looked at his yard and it was full. So many times you see people, or they say, I'm on a steep slope, and they just put in a ground cover. This was very layered landscaping, and so many beautiful shades of green and textures of green. So you had conifers, you had ferns, you had Japanese maples, and there were also a lot of azaleas and rhododendrons and hydrangeas, and a lot of the native hydrangeas, like the hydrangea quercifolia. So I think, well, if we had been there in May, we would probably have a different perception of this garden, because in May, it's probably in full bloom with those rhododendrons and those azaleas. So there were a lot of those in that garden. But they kind of got blended in with the other greenery. So, rhododendrons and azaleas don't stand out when they're not in bloom, unless you're a roadie like I am, and I'm seeing them, and I'm a woodland gardener. And so I've used spider plants for years in my woodland garden, because you learn that you can do things back there that you couldn't do in other gardens. Plants that you have in your house that say light, bright, indirect light, put them out in your garden. Orchids, So it was a beautiful, lush woodland landscape that he had turned a very challenging slope into a very enjoyable experience.
Yes, I would say that Jeff wins the award for most challenging property to try to garden on out of all the gardens that we saw on the tour. And I was thinking as you guys were talking that if you took all the plants out of that landscape and you went and bought that house, you'd tell people, well, we have a very little front yard with a fence around it, and the backyard is a straight slope. It's ungardenable. And so that's what he had to work with. And you would never have a sense, I think, of the true scale of that property because it was so lushly planted. It felt a lot bigger than it probably is in reality. It felt very intimate. And the other thing that I thought is there was a kind of a curious aspect to Jeff's garden. And I think it's because he did do some unusual things. He picked houseplants and brought them outside and put them in places where we weren't expecting them, like in those wonderful window boxes that you pointed out, Jen. And I'm so glad you did, because that's one of the standout features for me when I think about Jeff's garden. And what was absolutely incredible about those window boxes to me is that they were a combination of wandering Jew and spider plants. And then the whole front of them was Spanish moss. So I have no idea just how ugly those containers were underneath, and it doesn't matter because he completely masked it with the Spanish moss. And I just was like gaga over those. And then I mean, talk about a slope. We came around, well, first of all, it was single file through this garden. There was no doubling up. So we were single file walking through this garden, and you go down the side of this property. There was clearly a best way to go around the house, just like there is at my house. So it's like you go in on the right side and you come out on the left side. So we're going down on the right side, and it's narrow. And of course, there's a gorgeous water feature that starts at the top, and it's steep. And as you look across to the neighbor's property, there is kind of this tiki bar fencing. Do you guys remember that?
Mm-hmm. I do.
Yeah. It looked like a tiki bar as you're going down. It was like a staggered tiki bar. And so I'm taking that in going, okay, this is interesting. Very interesting. Loved everything. Was already in love with the huge tropical houseplants that were out front, and the houseplants and the Spanish moss for the window boxes. And then we started to see even more of Jeff's personality and his sense of humor, because he started to have this statuary, and it was just heads all along this fence line. He had started collecting the broken heads of statues. And then he had some of them just sitting along that fence line. And I love Game of Thrones. And I'm immediately thinking of the House of Black and White in the Hall of Faces, because that's what it looked like. I'm like, oh my gosh, I wonder if this guy is a big Game of Thrones fan, because it reminded me of that. And then we get around to the back, and he has this cactus, and he had found all these itty bitty skulls. And on the tips of the cactus, he had put a skull on each tip of the cactus. So there were just some aspects to this garden that were unusual, that were just a little bit different, but it made it so stand out. And I know it sounds maybe a little strange, but it worked. And I loved this garden. It was so unique. I loved all the different types of ornamental trees that he used on this property. That was amazing. He had such a unique microclimate in his backyard. Mm-hmm. His microclimate in the back. He was talking about all the different areas that come together, and his garden in the back is kind of the nexus of all these different zones. He was talking about that. And I mean, absolutely incredible. But I tell you what, if we would buy that property, if we'd have bought that property, 20, 30 years ago, we'd all been like, it's completely unusable. We can't do anything with this. The other thing I was thinking, and I asked him this, I'm like, do you have to rappel yourself down this slope? How do you garden on the slope? I mean, that slope is so steep in spots. I was just absolutely amazed.
Yeah, I think you're right. If I was looking at that house, I would have been like, we're still looking. I'm not gardening on that steep slope. Nope.
Yeah.
I know. Now I would be like, sure, I'll buy that house in that garden. Sure.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. What people can see that others just can't,
Well, and that's probably also a little clue to his personality. I'm betting you don't say no to Jeff, because I bet he'll figure out a way.
Yeah.
Based on that garden.
That's true. That's very true.
Yep. All right, ladies. The garden gods were smiling on us, because believe it or not, we had just passed the halfway point for our day. We had 3 gardens left by the time we headed out to Arlington, Virginia, to tour the garden of Scott Brenitzer. Now, Scott's a lifelong resident of the Washington, D.C. area, and he founded his landscape business back in 1987, and he's spent the past 26 years developing his company, which includes an award-winning landscape design practice and premier garden installation services. Now, Scott's intimate garden used unique elements such as specimen shrubs and bamboo to create a sense of movement and privacy. Every feature of his organic garden was designed to eliminate runoff and direct all water into the ground, reducing pollution in the Chesapeake Bay. And before the tour wrapped up, we also enjoyed a presentation from Bartlett Trees. In fact, we were each gifted 3 different tree specimens courtesy of Bartlett. So thank you, Bartlett Trees. Speaking of trees, Tracy, why don't you kick things off by talking a little bit about Scott's passion for beautifying his neighborhood with trees, because that was an extraordinary part of the introduction he prepared to welcome us to his property.
Sure. Yeah, you could tell that he was very passionate about his community there, and he was very passionate about, he told the story about how they had, I don't know if they had formed, I think they had formed an informal group where they had planted all the trees along that street. And he had encouraged every time new homeowners come in to plant more trees. So that even the avenue that they were on was very tree lined, and he, very proud, and kudos to him for leading that effort of increasing their, tree canopy there in that neighborhood. So I love stories like that. And you briefly mentioned the interesting stonework. This was a really interesting story. Yeah, the previous owner had taken, basically it's called exposed aggregate. I don't know if you know what that is. I'll try to describe it. I lived in Alabama, and exposed aggregate was a very popular choice for driveways. It's sort of like taking a bag of pea gravel and pressing it down so that it kind of makes this mosaic of the pea gravel. So that's kind of what it looked like. But what they did was, it was a concrete wall. The previous owner had applied this exposed aggregate to the wall and the steps and the railing and everything. And it was a really interesting look. And it blended very well with the landscaping in the house. It was very well done. I liked it. I thought it was a very unique characteristic of the house and added to the appeal of the landscape. In the front, it had a row of hydrangeas, it had a row of grass, it had a small lawn, and then the very, I kind of think of them as eastern or southern, is the boxwoods around the front. And then you go down the side garden. And another interesting story about this, being a tree lover, he had a huge tree in the back that they lost recently. And I can't remember what the tree was. Was it a sycamore? Does anybody remember the tree that they just lost? It was a huge tree.
Yep, elm. It was elm. Mm-hmm.
Was it an elm?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was an elm. And it was kind of in the process of losing it, but he had lost most of it. And so that was one of the reasons Bartlett was there also, was to kind of talk a little bit about the elm tree. But the landscaping back there, I think it's going to be just fine, because even though he lost, and I think a lot of people go through this where you lose a tree and what was a shade garden is now a sun garden, right? Right? You have to adapt and change, and, things are going to change, right? But he had a Harry Lauder walking stick back there, right? The contorted filbert. And, I've always grown that in sun. I'm like, that thing's going to love this now, right? And there are azaleas back there, which are very adaptable. Boxwoods are very adaptable. A lot of boxwoods in the back of that garden. I would describe it, the back, it was very much, a courtyard garden, like you would see in New Orleans or someplace like that. It's very much the style of a genteel southern courtyard garden. I noticed the very symmetrical placement of the boxwoods by that shed. And I had just met somebody who grows boxwoods. He's really into boxwoods. He's a Pineview Nursery, and he had given a presentation on boxwoods and gave me a new appreciation of them. So I was familiar with these boxwoods in this garden, and I never would have been able to go to someone and go, "Are there D runks on each side of your shed?" And he looked at me like, "How did you do that?" Because a boxwood is a boxwood is a boxwood. And why, yes, they are. And so after listening to our friend who was a boxwood, appreciated them, I grew to appreciate them, brought them home, learning about them now and have a new appreciation. And so that garden also, he had a lot of very nice specimens of boxwood in that garden. So.
Tracy, what was that variety of boxwood? What did you call it?
D-E-E, Runk, R-U-N-K. And they're a prestigious, tall, boxwood. So I'm sure people took pictures of the shed with, there was a container in front, and there was the orange door, and there were the two low typical boxwood, and then the tall ones growing up on each side were D. Brunk. So, and he has some other unusual ones in there too, but.
And you're saying D as in David, so D-E-E.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
R-U-N-K. It's 2 words.
D. Brunk. All right. Must be somebody's name.
Well, I really liked Scott's garden, and I felt just so bad for him when he explained that, that tree came down, and yet as a gardener, you kind of have to say game on. Now my garden is going to be totally different, and I have an excuse to buy more plants.
I love you, Beth. That's awesome.
Once like the full reality sets in on you, you just kind of have to rebound from that. But I liked his garden because he basically has a small space garden, what I would consider a small space garden, and he's used that space so well. And did anyone catch the little cat door knocker type thing, and that is telltale of this garden, all those little details, the butterflies, large butterflies on that gorgeous blue container that was in the center of all the boxwoods, and then the vertical gardens that they had to the left of that, and then you turned around and there was the gorgeous fountain with the lilies in it and all the lush greenery that goes around the fountain. The stonework, like the aggregate and concrete that Tracy was talking about, and the vessels that were then filled with all the different plants. And if you looked around, that went up the side of the house, and even one very strategically placed by the street. And that's where that's a detail most people really forget. We don't typically go down by the street, and yet his street is so important to him. He said, if you move in, you're going to get a tree and you're going to plant it. And that's just the way it's going to be. Welcome to the neighborhood. Plant your tree. And I thought that was so funny. He's like, I'm sorry, no, we're not negotiating here. Plant your tree, and no one seems to mind because all the trees are planted. There's tons of trees. Nobody really seems to mind that. I think you would accept that tree probably pretty graciously just because he's passionate about it in a way that gets everybody else excited about it too. He just talked about, his block with such pride.
Yeah, this is Jen. I agree with you. And I thought it was interesting when he was talking about the history of the house. Not only was he telling us about the stone aggregate, which also there were those planters by the street too, made out of that stone aggregate as well. But he said that the garage was originally built for a Model T. I don't know if anyone else.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And then he was talking about how I guess the driveway used to be much longer, and then he shortened it. I believe that's what he said. So that was interesting, just giving the background of the property. And he did have out in the back patio area, there was a little album out that showed the history of the garden. It was in front of the fountain. And I love when gardeners do that and they have documentation of how the property has changed, because I think for a lot of people who are new to gardening, they want that instant wow factor. They want to be able to walk into Barbara Katz's garden and then bring that home and make it theirs, But every garden has its own story and it has its own lifespan, and you have to embrace the early stages. And I thought it was nice that he had that on display for people to look at if they were interested in. And I love Tracy's description of it being a courtyard garden, because I was having a hard time phrasing it. And when you said courtyard garden, I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what it was. And I'm surprising myself by looking through these pictures. I'm going back and I'm realizing that I took a lot more pictures of all the little nuances in the garden, not necessarily plants, but all the different features that were tucked away in all these gardens. And Beth had mentioned the cat door knocker. There was the blue pot with the swirling butterflies around it, the fountain with the regal lion, and it was like lined with the moss at the bottom, and it was pouring water into the pond below with the lily pads. It was really nice also that they were able to tie in the unfortunate demise of his tree with the Bartlett tree rep, who was able to explain, like he was showing samples of how the tree gets killed off. I'm like looking back on my iPhone. I'm like, did I take any pictures of the plants? Because because in his garden, I have like just all, like the stone planters. I have the dog. Oh my gosh. I think there's like a theme with this Garden Blogger Fling. Like at least once a day, there was like a personality of a dog that appeared. And his dog that day was definitely the one that was just like, hey, how's it going? Welcome. Sit down. Have yourself some water. Over here. And he just had like his own little personality to himself that just added an extra bit of joy to his garden. It was really cute. It was great.
It was great. Well, I thought that Scott could have a second career as a historian because I think he does such a great job of trying to understand what's come before. And even, that detail was applied to his home. He didn't just buy that property. He figured out who the previous owner was. He did all this research and he really loved that house. And what was amazing about that is he really bought it as a very young man. I think he was in his early 20s when he bought that property. And as he was talking to us about it, he acknowledged that he single-handedly transformed his street because there weren't any trees of any substance on that street. And it was kind of a rundown street. And now it's a highly coveted area. People want to buy on that street because he can look up and down that street and see all the beautiful boulevard trees that shade that street. It was so homey, so quaint. And I also thought that he could be a spokesperson for Sherwin-Williams, or Sherwin-Williams should want to get a hold of this guy because there's kind of a crispness to anything that was painted on his property, including that shed. I mean, it was the perfect shade of whatever would be the hottest slate gray in 2017, and then the white trim. And then the door was painted pumpkin, and that's what set the whole thing off. It was just great color combinations. The house was just trimmed out to the nines. I mean, it was just absolutely gorgeous. I could have looked at the architecture on the house. I thought all the details were incredible. This was a house that I took a lot of pictures of the house in addition to the garden. And I was actually regretful that I didn't have to go to the bathroom because they were allowing people in to go to the bathroom in their home. And the outside was so nice. Now I'm kicking myself. I should have just said I needed to wash my hands or something because I would have loved to look inside that house.
Seen it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I agree.
The outside was immaculate. And, words I would use to describe this garden would be refined, elegant, tasteful. This was probably the most elevated garden in terms of what he had going on there. This could be a garden that's in Architectural Digest. It wouldn't surprise me. Or Traditional Home, something like that. And I mean, even to the point where I think Tanya Peel shared a picture of the spread that they had laid out for us on this little table, which included bottles of champagne that were chilling. I mean, that's just, they're entertainers. You can totally tell. But I loved this garden. I loved the gravel. I loved the bluestone patio. It was just a gret property.
He's so passionate about it, but in an engaging way. You would definitely just want to sit there and talk with him. Yeah, I just think how much that little community there of his street has really just been blessed by him and in what he thought, because he saw something that nobody else could see. It wasn't like that when he moved in there all those years ago.
Yeah. And he's so young looking, isn't he? When he said how long he'd lived on that property, I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, you're doing the math and you're like, that can't possibly be.
That can't possibly be. Yeah, he looked as fantastic as his property did. Let's put it that way. I thought he looked great.
I just want
All
to
right.
jump in real quick, too. Beth has said how he saw the potential, and I think that's a good theme for this day. We talked about Barbara Katz and how she saw the potential in her backyard with all the colors, and then how Jeff looked at his property with the slope and made it something wonderful. And then the same thing with Scott. Like that, I think, is definitely a theme of this day on the Garden Bloggers Fling, is to take what you have and think outside the box and think about how you can make this, your fingerprints are all over it, and how you can make it unique. And I think all the gardens, even like Debbie too, they all said that.
I think you're absolutely right. The one thing that I really came away with too is that every garden that we saw was at least 20 years old, if not more.
True.
And that is something to really think about if you're looking at your own garden. You know, if you do that garden comparing thing that I know none of us really do, but, you know, maybe we do kind of do a little bit. You know, I'm looking at mine, I'm like, hey, I got 8 more years. You know, my garden's young. It's only 12 years old.
Pressure's off.
Like, and don't judge me because I had 3 kids in high school all at the same time and I was never home, you know, so don't judge me. But, you know, that we don't think in that time span when we are looking at our own garden and we want it to be something. Even in 5 years, we expect it to be something. And it takes time and commitment to stay with it. And so that was one of my biggest takeaways from the private gardens.
What is that saying about like gardens are the slowest form of art or something like that? Right? So
yeah, take that time.
Yep. Next, we got back on the bus and we traveled to Great Falls, Virginia, to a great property, great in size. It was the biggest garden that we saw on day 2, and it was the garden of Ellen Ash. Now, Ellen is a self-proclaimed garden jack of all trades, and she works 8 to 10 hours a day in her garden. Now, the front garden featured a spectacular variety of azaleas, rhododendrons, hydrangeas, flowering trees, and a dry riverbed. But the highlight of the property is the almost 2-acre woodland garden with paths carved among the tall American hollies, oaks, maples, hickories, and dogwoods that are native to the property. Her winding woodland garden is something of a mossy refuge, and her mass of trees and shade plants include, but are not limited to, azaleas, laurels, camellias, hydrangeas, hellebores, epimedium, caryxes, and ferns aplenty. All right, Miss Beth, you're up next. What did you think of Ellen's amazing property? Her garden was chock full of surprises.
Well, when you start to walk through Ellen's property, it's, you know, you think whimsical and you think humorous and funny. And I was talking with Ellen. I actually ate dinner with Ellen that night. She was at our table. And, you know, one thing she said to me, she goes, people always think that I have such a great sense of humor, that I must be really funny. She said, after they see my garden. But the truth is, I'm not. And that in itself was just so funny, you know, and she was just, you know, such a delight to sit and eat with and such an engaging conversationalist. You know, she might not consider herself to be funny, but her garden is just an expression of the way that she engages, I think, with life and with other people. I guess she really loves dahlias, and I don't know how, but I did not come home with a single picture of a dahlia. Did anybody else get the dahlias?
I saw them. They weren't blooming yet. They weren't
blooming. Okay, thank you for that, because I'm like, how could I have missed the dahlias? But, you know, I could really see that she, in her personality, that she probably really is an extraordinary dahlia grower. You know, they're just such vivacious, bright flowers. I mean, the dahlias each have such unique personalities, and Ellen is like that. You can tell that I'm really into how personalities are reflected into gardens. I think they're just very personal that way. And once you get to know the gardener, then you just appreciate the garden so much more. And so it was just really very fun to sit next to her during our meal together. And her garden is one of those that I think you could truly walk through every season, and it would almost be like a different garden. It'd be interesting to see what her garden looks like in the winter. I imagine it has an incredible amount of winter interest.
Yeah, this garden, I think this was my favorite private garden because, again, I'm a woodland garden and I love woodland landscapes. And this was 5 acres. Most of that 5 acres was woodland. I think what I liked the most about it was the personality. And she said, I'm not funny. And I'm like, oh, you have to be funny because your landscape has so many wonderful little surprise elements. And some of them were very lovely and pleasant, and some of them really caught you off guard. And I loved it because I've shared a haunted house. And it almost felt like that to me, like the way things were placed to catch you off guard. I just enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun garden. I'm actually going to backtrack and go to the entrance where I believe that strip there was in full sun when we just got off the bus, and everybody kind of just went right by it. But I think that was her cutting garden because all of the lilies were still in bloom there, and everything was meticulously staked and tagged with plant tags, which, of course, I appreciated for my part, And I said, oh, here, we make these. And she goes, oh, I don't really care about the tags. She goes, oh, wait, yes, I do. She said, and she said, well, I show my flowers. And so she's in, a garden club, and she does flower shows. And when people have cutting gardens and they put them into flower shows, they have rules about what has to be on the submission tag that you write up the label for your plant, because you have to know what you're entering. Pretty purple dahlia is not going to cut it. Because it has to have the exact, proper, correctly spelled name to qualify. So you have to know what you're entering, and then they judge, based on, is that the best representation of that cultivar or that variety? That's why it's so important. There were alliums there that had passed their peak, but I was in a garden club in New York, and this is a thing we did in New York, and everybody on the tour was like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this. The alliums had gone past their peak, but, they still have that really interesting seed head, right? That spiky seed head that's really interesting, and I leave mine. But we started spray painting ours in New York. And usually you use really vibrant, bright colors. And it really changes those alliums to be, hers were subtle. The colors were like, is that real? Is that not real? Is that real?
Yes.
So right there, you got a sense of what you're going to encounter. Like, is this real? Is this not real? And so that was her cutting garden. And then it went into that woodland garden, which started with that lush moss path. And she did have her plantings back through there labeled as well. But then there were all the little interesting elements of surprise throughout the garden. Like I took a picture of and liked the spiders. There were themes as you went throughout. So there'd be birds here, there'd be snails here. There were cats throughout. There were gnomes in certain areas aggregated together. But they played out a story in her garden. And they were little outdoor rooms, really. And each little room had a little story there with the statuary or the elements that were in there. And the spiders I loved, because I have a lot of spiders in my garden. And I'm like, why don't I do this? There's about 8 different size spiders. One was very large, small, smaller, 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 smaller. And they're coming towards you on the path. And the way they were placed, it was just like, a little startling. And she had snakes, fake but very real looking snakes, placed throughout the garden, hanging down from a tree limb, coming out of a bird house. There was a flamingo section, right, where they had these beautiful blue hydrangeas, and you had these bright colored, different pink flamingos. And then there was the one black flamingo that said, "Beware the attack flamingo." So I just love that. I just love that. Yeah, I thought her garden was definitely full of personality and fun.
Did you see the sign that said 3 blind mice? And she had like the computer mice hanging from their mouths.
I was just laughing too because I miss both the spiders and snakes, and I'm really kind of glad that I did.
I actually was able to go inside the bathroom at the pool house, and there was a snake, like a fake snake, coming out from under the bathroom sink.
Oh my gosh, I would have been flying out of there.
Yes. Yes.
And I remember like turning around and going, okay.
Yes.
And then, you walk out of there and there's like the bubble machine and
yes.
this pool. And, so I felt like I was walking through a magazine spread the whole time. But then Angie, who was, we were hanging out together that day, and she said that she felt like she was in a rap video and that the rappers were going to come out of the house and start doing a music video right then and there. It was this beautiful pool, and it was complete with the swan float, which I guess is characteristic of certain music videos as well. So, and there was just so many different elements. I love the flamingos. I love the attack flamingo. There was also, when you entered a part of the woodland garden, I guess, I'm not sure if you call it a heaven's gate, but it's like that round circular stone.
Some people call it a moon gate, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Heaven's Gate, Moon Gate.
That was very cool.
Speaking of our friend Pam, I think she got a perfect photo of that because I remember I didn't get a picture of it without people in it, but I think she got one where it's just straight up, like right out of a magazine type of photo. And I remember I was getting ready to leave and somebody had said, "Oh, Jen, did you see all the rabbits in the woods? There was a rabbit path."
Yeah.
At that point, like I had to make it onto the bus, but I was like, "Oh, I gotta see the rabbits." So I start kind of, but I guess you could say jogging, looking for the rabbits. And she did. She had a little sign, the rabbit path, and little ceramic rabbits everywhere. And I remember just trying to take as many pictures as I could, but not get in trouble for not getting to the bus on time,
Well, I thought it's ironic that she has this huge property because you would never guess looking at her. She is just this pint-sized lady. And I don't think anyone can imagine just how much work she does on this garden property all by herself. It's incredible.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
It was very well done.
What was also very sweet about visiting this garden is the fact that she had her very good friend, Sherry, walking through the garden, talking to the garden bloggers. And I think anytime you can go on a garden tour and have the gardener's friend there as well to support the gardener, I just think that speaks volumes about the kind of person that owns that property, that she had that kind of a friend. Pam wrote another great blog post on Ellen's garden. And Beth, there's a great picture in there of you speaking with Barbara Katz along the woodland path. You guys are just kind of off to the side. Yeah, there's a great photo in there of you and Barbara just talking because Barbara was wearing that orange shirt that day. So I can I can totally pick her out. And then just in Facebook, if you go into that Garden Bloggers Fling and you search for Ellen Ash's garden, there was also a picture of Barbara and her husband, Howard, and they were perfectly framed underneath that stone moon gate. And it was a great shot. So I thought Ellen did a great job. Such a huge property and so much work, but truly a labor of love, you could tell. Well, it's time to talk about our last garden of the day. And we traveled to Tyson's Corner, Virginia, and we had the rare opportunity to visit the garden of a local garden icon. And of course, I'm talking of none other than Peg Beer. Peg is a gardening legend in the DC area. Now, according to Peg, it's not the wow factor, but the smile when a small discovery is made in the garden. Tucked beside this roadside garden and somewhat secluded are a small waterfall, miniature plants, and fairy gardens where discovery and imagination are stimulated. As we walked down the gravel driveway where all things love to seed, we were greeted by an abundance of container gardens. We passed through a weedy lawn, no chemicals here, and beyond to the wooded area and pathways that lead to further discoveries. The garden has evolved according to the needs of Peg's family, and you can almost imagine all of them gathering there. Her 4 children, their spouses, and 12 grandchildren. Peg's garden is a place to be, to reflect, and to gather. And I thought it would be fun to close this introduction out with a comment that was left on Pam Pennick's blog post about Peg Beer's garden. Here's what this reader wrote. I had the pleasure of visiting Peg's garden 20 years ago on a tour when I lived in Northern Virginia. She was a fixture in the gardening scene in Northern Virginia and was on a local gardening television show back then. The pictures of Peg's garden are fabulous. And then I have to confess, when I got back home and started doing research for these Garden Blogger Fling episodes, I actually watched some videos of Peg working, and she does a tremendous job on air. She's a fantastic on-air gardening talent. And we were lucky enough to see her personal garden. Jen, do you want to kick things off for us and talk about Peg's garden?
Sure. I would love to talk about her garden. I thought the thing that caught me right away was that she had this sweet, whimsical fairy garden in the front when we came right off the buses. And I like that she used birdhouses. She used fairy statues of different sizes. So it wasn't just the typical miniature garden people that were scattered throughout the front yard, but she used larger fairy statues as well. She had built this village basically in the front garden that kind of, you would walk out a little bit, but then you would have to come back and turn back and join the rest of the group as they advanced into the garden. She even incorporated those fairy garden features up into the trees with air plants. And I thought that was pretty unique that she carried the theme upward so much. Once you left the fairy garden area, you went by this whole area of bright, colorful containers. They were filled with annuals like petunias and nasturtiums. There was terracotta pots that were elevated off the ground. And then along the staircase was English ivy, and tucked into the English ivy were little rabbit statues, which of course is a major win for me. And I have several pictures of the rabbit statues in the ivy. And she had a lot of accents too. There was like a potting shed area. On a shelf in the potting shed area was a collection of watering cans. And she took glass globes, the ones that you traditionally see like hanging in someone's window. I think they're, it's supposed to be like spirit catchers, or they reflect the light. They're beautiful glass orbs. And she took several of them and placed them in a large ceramic planter, without a drainage hole. So she filled it with water, and she had those glass globes floating in the water. So there was just so many different materialistic touches to the garden that complemented the plants. You can tell that there's a lot of love and a lot of appreciation for plants, and the feeling that you get when you walk into a garden, that happiness factor. And that was the overwhelming sense I had from her garden, was that I was happy. I would love to stay longer, maybe have a glass of lemonade and just soak it all in.
Yeah, I really liked her garden as well. And I love that central focus part with the begonias almost had like a tropical feel to it. She had all the red chairs and a carpet out, but it was like just this central area that was made for sitting and relaxing. And then off of this area were all the little different paths that went to other parts of the garden. Someone told us that Peg is at least 80 years old, I think. And she, is definitely a very accomplished plants woman. And it does not look like she is slowing down at all. Her garden is still very much in full force. And she was saying, I want to start a blog and help me get my blog going. And, just a lady that just has a lot of energy. And so I felt that coming from her garden as well, with the bright colors and just that there's just a lot of life and a lot of energy right here. When we were leaving, her son and daughter, I think they were out there with her and giving her hugs and stuff. So I don't know, it was just a great experience. It was a great way to finish off the day of gardens. I felt I was like, okay, who's got a glass of wine? Let's toast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think great. I think Beth hit the nail on the head there. If I were describing this garden experience, I would say it would be come sit a spell with me, because she did have so many well-placed and different themed sitting areas throughout the garden. So it was definitely a, come and sit with me type of garden, and let's just relax and enjoy the environment and the landscape. And from the front porch was like that to, I really liked the sunken garden area, where there were steps going down on both sides, but there was really just a table and 2 chairs in there. That was it. And all around you was the walls, the wood, natural wood of the steps and the walls. And then eye level was all the lush greenery around you there. So I could just imagine going out there in the morning and having a cup of coffee. And what a wonderful start to the day it would be there in that sunken garden, right off of her house. And then out towards one of her garden paths, again, there was that sitting area with the bright red Adirondack chairs and the red cushions and the outdoor rug with the red pattern and the red begonias all around. Definitely had a very themed sitting area there. And then the other one was kind of off to the side of the sunken garden was another sitting area with a lot of containers that were that bright cobalt blue with orange flowers. It was very, very vivid and striking and gave you a different theme and feel there. So yeah, I definitely thought this was a very relaxing garden and a very, social garden, in that she had these areas where you could obviously bring friends and sit down and enjoy a glass of wine.
I couldn't agree more. Peg is such a beloved horticulturist and gardening personality in this area. In fact, I had read that this was her 41st year working at Merrifield's, which is that garden center that we got to go to. So she's basically gardening royalty here in Virginia. So I think for all of the locals that were able to get a chance to see Peg's personal home and garden, they jumped on it. That was a great opportunity for them. And I think out of all of the gardens that we saw on this day, Peg's garden really felt like a home garden. She raised these 4 kids and she's got these 12 grandchildren. And I could just imagine her grandkids coming over and then running all over in the yard back there, because there's so many paths and so many different trails that lead to all these wonderful destinations. And it really is a very creative, imaginative space for kids. A perfect place to explore and use their imagination. It just reminded me a lot of my own grandmother's garden. And again, I have to say, it was so fun to see the reactions of so many of the local gardeners, the garden designers that came with to tour this garden. They were very curious to see Peg's garden.
Yeah, and it was so nice to have so many of those private gardeners and designers accompanying us throughout the day. But even with that, I would have liked to have more time with them because I was like out in the gardens,
Yes.
looking at the gardens and everything. And there was so much that on these tours, there's so much to absorb. And each year, I think when you go, you get a little bit more comfortable and a little bit better at it. Next year, if they do the same thing, maybe I shouldn't tell you my secret here, but maybe I should keep this to myself. But I'm thinking I need to be better about choosing my bus seatmates and sitting next to some of these landscape designers and asking them some of my questions.
All right. Tracy and Jen and I will be slipping them $20 going, we'll pay you $20 if you sit by us and not Beth.
Yeah. Go on next to Beth.
Oh my gosh.
All right.
Well, this was a very, very full day, and I'm curious what you guys think. Have you had time to reflect? Do you prefer touring private gardens or public gardens?
Well, I personally like touring the public gardens. I know that going to see the private gardens is a really nice, special invite. And I think a lot of the private gardens, especially the ones we saw on this tour, seem like the type of private gardens where they regularly host tours, that they want to be open to the public to come and see them. And I love landscapes like that are private and they have in their mind, which is how Hillwood started, right? That was a private estate that turned into a public garden and a public estate museum and garden. And so I love people who think like that, like I want to make this landscape and turn it into something that the public can come and enjoy. And based on what I do, I see that and I experience that a lot with people who have landscapes and they want to ensure that in the future or in some way, like the Garden Conservancy, it deals in this. If you're familiar with the Garden Conservancy, they help private landscapes turn to public landscapes or at least have certain schedule of open garden days. I really love public landscapes because I like to document them on PlantsMap and then share them out via our social channels so that more people will come to those public landscapes. Because my background, again, with cooperative extension and volunteering with all sorts of small and large public landscapes, I just feel like there's a difference when you're going and volunteering and you're sweating it out and you're digging weeds out in a public garden that isn't your own. It's a different kind of love that you have as a volunteer going to those public landscapes. The most fun to me is when you're volunteering in a landscape and people stop and talk to you and ask you, what are you doing? How do you do this? How do you grow this? What is this? Yes, there are paid people, but most of these landscapes rely on volunteers.
Absolutely.
So I'm very much an advocate for being able to go to these public landscapes and then promote them through PlantsMap and through my social channels.
Yes.
I'll share. I think it's really nice to see the private gardens because there's that, I feel like the exclusivity of like, oh, I get to come in and see what other people normally don't have access to. And I do love public gardens and I love to visit them. But I feel like I can get to public gardens other times of the year. And, there's that almost like that backstage pass feeling to seeing the private gardens on this tour. And I really like that because I was able to see, like, for example, Jeff's All the Shade. Like, he opened up my eyes to so many different combinations that I could use. Or Barbara Katz's use of color. And I feel like those applications of plants, I can then take what I like, store it away, and then have it come back out in my garden in some shape or form, like whether it be, I really like this container combination that someone selected, or the way this plant pairs with another one. And I feel like it's nice to see how private gardens do that. But on the other hand, the public gardens, they do offer so many educational aspects that are wonderful, and they definitely need to be funded. They need the support of the public. People need to go and visit their public gardens multiple times a year because they change. They look so different all the time. I would say in the case of the Fling, I kind of preferred the private gardens a little bit more, but the public gardens still have a place in my heart as well.
Yeah, I get exactly what you're saying there, Jen. I love public gardens. In fact, I volunteer at our own the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum and love it. I've been a tour guide there and learned just so much about the Arboretum by being a tour guide. And my knowledge of plants and design, all of that really came together when I was doing that. I have to also say, though, that the private gardens that we're able to see on the Fling, especially this Fling, to me, it's what really made me want to attend the Fling because these were gardens created by landscape designers, plant people, plant experts. There was going to be something new and something different, and it was just an opportunity that by myself, I wouldn't have been able to pull off. Because I do have my public garden card, when I visit a different place, then I can make sure that I get to that public garden. But as far as the Fling, it was kind of like having an inside track. I mean, we really saw some really phenomenal private gardens and plants and design used in ways that I thought was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So for this tour, I would say that I did really enjoy and feel very fortunate that I got to see those private gardens and got to see just the years of experience that these landscape designers have all come together in their own personal gardens. I really value that experience.
Well, that's the perfect segue to my next question, which is how each of you got started gardening, and then maybe take us on a virtual tour of your garden.
Okay, I'll kick that off. This is Beth. I started gardening probably as a young girl. I remember my mom giving me a flat of annuals and just a tiny little piece of land that was actually underneath a little tree. I think she probably did it just to keep me busy and didn't really think much would come out of it. And then, I went on, I probably helped my mom in her garden. I didn't really do much with the vegetable gardens. And I know I really helped my grandmother tend her area, especially lawn care. We did that. But when I really got into gardening was when I bought my first home. And it was a smaller space. I just wanted to begin planting things. And so I think my first garden was really like 10 feet long and 2 feet wide. And I planted iris bulbs, and now the house that we're in now, my gardens wrap around my house and then also around the exterior of my property in kind of an undulating fashion. And in the center of it is our main patio. So you can pretty much see all my backyard gardens from my patio, but then I have used the side gardens as well. I just value plants more than I value grass. I'll just go ahead and just be direct with that. Some people really like to mow a lawn. And when we laid our own sod, my husband and I laid our own sod 12 years ago, and I looked at him and I said, why are we doing this? We're only going to be digging it up anyway. And we have done that every year. We dig up another section of it. So my garden, I think I said earlier, it starts on the left side, and that's where I have my vertical gardens and my tomatoes growing, and then I have raised beds. And keep in mind that my husband did forgive me for saying that to him because he does build all of my garden structures. So he's very supportive, and he is. And and then I have our pollinator garden, and I have a conifer and rose garden, and then we have just a whole row of really beautiful flowering shrubs from the nine barks, hydrangeas, different varieties of hydrangeas. And then we go into where the barbecue porch is that I'm expanding my flowering herb garden there. I lavender and variety of different calendula and zinnias and all the different flowering herbs. It's kind of neat in my garden. I just have to say this gardening is definitely contagious. For many years, my husband called it an oasis. There was nobody gardening around us. And since then, the homes have changed over. And we've had new people come in. But now everybody gardens around me. And I got to tell you, it's way more fun to garden with your neighbors and not feel like you're going it alone, because it attracts more of the beneficial bugs and pollinators that you want. So I feel like my garden is really kicking off, and I've been doing it for 12 years. So I'm excited about my garden.
Love that.
Well, Beth and I kind of share some similar stories there too, because we bought a new house in 2012, and new house comes with a builder's landscaping, and we are on 2 acres, big front lawn, and I was determined to not try to get the grass crew because it was, a new lawn on a new house.
I'm so with you on that.
I keep putting in beds, right? But we didn't want to hire anyone or do sod or anything like that. I started gardening with my first house as well in 1999 in Virginia. And before that, I had always remembered, going with my mom every year to our local greenhouse. She'd say, "We're going to the greenhouse," and I just could not wait to go there. I could not wait to get to that garden center. I can still remember the smells and the feeling and the humidity, and I just loved it there, She was really into the annuals, summer annuals, and houseplants and hanging containers and things like that, and I'd get to help pick out stuff and plant stuff. But then when I had my first house in 1999, I was able to pick out my own plants and plant my own plants. And now what am I going to do? I felt kind of lost, and I was into more than just the summer annuals, and what happened was I thought I was buying a hydrangea from a catalog. Turns out it was a viburnum, because the common name snowball bush, where I was, meant a hydrangea. But in this catalog, snowball bush was the viburnum snowball bush. That's when I discovered I might need to learn the botanical names. And I started keeping track of what I was buying, and I would keep binders. I would take pictures. This was a long time ago. You would go get your pictures developed at CVS or Walmart, and you go with your pictures and put them in your binder with the plant tag and save your information. So that was kind of the precursor of how PlantsMap started. Now, we bought a new house. First time we never bought a new house in 2012. And so totally blank slate, right? My husband said, "I think I'd like to plant a few conifers in the front yard," because we had a friend that was in the Conifer Society in New York. And I'm like, fine, because I've always been a backyard gardener. I like the fence in my backyard, and it's private. It's an extension. To me, it's an exterior back room of my home. That's how I view my backyard. And so I'm like, fine, because I never liked to garden in the front of my house anyway. So when you pull up to our house, it's a his and her landscape. Bill kind of has the front, and it is a conifer palooza. So I think he has about 700 conifers in the front yard. Wow. Wow. We have 2 acres. So a lot of that front lawn has been converted to beds and planting of some very big trees. Like we love dawn redwoods and we love bald cypress. We got the idea of doing a pollinator strip because we had the slope strip on the front by the road. And I'm like, why don't you just not mow the ditch one year? Because there's all these beautiful wildflowers out here. So it's clover and rudbeckia and yarrow and all sorts of asters and things like that. So we call it our pollinator strip. But then he put in above it an actual bed that he calls his pollinator strip, where he started with grasses, which people don't think of, which actually host a lot of pollinators. And this is full sun. That's really a very beautiful kind of show-stopping, slow down as people drive by, pull into our driveway. What is that? What is that? So that's the front. And then I have a side garden which I call my wicked plants garden, which are where any toxic plants go, such as my hellebores and my digitalis and things like that. Because I have dogs. One of them likes to graze, so I have to be careful about what I put in the backyard. And the backyard is very much a woodland garden, which is where I garden. So we have a new water feature pond, koi pond that we put in together. It has a hodgepodge of my plants and his plants, but then the majority of the backyard is a woodland garden with, I'm into viburnums. I think I have 25 different species of viburnums. And I like to let them grow naturally. And they're in the shade, which is actually where viburnums grow. You usually see them in landscaping in full sun and trimmed into a shrub. But these look much different than the ones you would see in a typical landscape because they look natural. And we just put in an arbor gate, and we got a lot of new bulb plants to put over there by the arbor gate to play with. And then on out, we just cleared the forest mulcher, cleared out a lot of invasive plants, underbrush for us. So we took out autumn olive, we took out the invasive honeysuckle, we took out all that kind of stuff with this forest mulcher, which is just a fantastic way to do it. So now we have an all new blank slate to play with. That's our garden.
That sounds amazing.
Wow. I can't imagine all those conifers. That's amazing.
Well, a lot of them are dwarf. I would say he has close to that many. And then I have about 800 plants on my profile on Plants Map that are in the Cloudy Way garden.
That's like gardening goals right there. You know what they all are because you were so great about labeling everything. And that's perfect.
I started that from the very beginning with the binders. I became obsessed with what was I growing, and I wanted to know the plants more. And I learned very quickly that the tags were not necessarily the best representation that you get at the garden center of that plant. Mm-hmm. You had to go and research it and talk to people and learn more about it and learn the family. Know the botanical name. There are hints in that botanical name that tell you how to grow that plant. And know the family. The family is like if you get married, the family tells you a lot about that. And the family tells you a lot about that plant. So you can't exclude family.
And the longer you're married, the longer you know that.
That gives you some hints to the personality of that plant. So,
yeah. Oh, I love that. That's great. Well, Jen, you get to follow that amazing garden. No pressure.
I know. I don't think I can. Sorry. Well, I'll do my best. So I grew up with gardening, even though I lived in Queens in the city. I was lucky that I lived in a two-family house. We had a long, narrow strip of yard in the back, which then sloped down, and then you had the Long Island Railroad tracks. And my grandfather lived a couple blocks over, so he was one of the first people who built a house on that street in Queens, on Austin Street. This was during the 30s and 40s, so he grew his own grapes for wine, and he had chickens. It was it's crazy to look at the old photos and think oh yeah, this is Queens, and you had chickens back here. When I would go visit him, he would show me how to grow tomatoes. He would show me the cucumbers. He had a big ornamental Kwanzaa cherry tree that was growing in his front yard that I would climb. And I had my mom who always found a way or an excuse to go to a garden center. And I joke around with my husband that that's one of the traits that I inherited from her. Because I can tell you where some place is located based on the proximity it is to the garden center. So I'll be oh yeah, I know where that is. It's 5 miles away from that. He was into house plants and orchids, but she actually passed away in 2005. I joke around, I grow orchids inside the house, and I don't give them as much attention as I think they really should have. But I say that they're her orchids. She's the one controlling how they bloom, and they always bloom around her birthday in March. So I'm always yep, that's all you. So, and then my dad he was a gardener too. He was very much into the lots of chops and bushes and make them look very manicured. And he would go and buy stones and put them in the car. And I remember once when I was younger, he had a station wagon, and he bought so many bags of white decorative stone that he actually ruined the struts on his car.
Oh my gosh.
So that was like the most expensive do-it-yourself project ever. So we bought our first house, and it was completely a weedy lawn. There was no landscaping whatsoever, not even those stereotypical foundation shrubbery. We didn't even have that. I didn't really pay attention to where plants should go. And I realized through trial and error when things started not to work in the backyard that there was a whole list of plants that couldn't grow near black walnut trees. But it took a long time for me to figure out, like, oh, it's all connected. And then I got into soil testing. And through all my trials and errors, I figured it out along the way, luckily. And now it's like a kind of like a conversation piece. When people are outside walking their dogs, they'll stop me and they'll ask me what certain plants are, or they'll tell me they like something that's blooming at the moment. And just to give you an idea of what's happening out there, there's 3 pear trees, there's 2 plum trees, there's a grape arbor, there's 2 raised beds of raspberries, there's blueberry bushes under one of the pear trees, there's a wisteria arbor, there's about 2 honeysuckle trellises, a whole row of lilacs along my property line, hydrangeas scattered about. There's raised beds along my driveway where I grow most of my edibles. And that's like all just happening in the front garden, along with annuals, perennials. I've tried to grow more plants that are pollinator friendly. I'm on my way to having part of my garden become certified as a Monarch Way Station. I love life in the garden, and I think the front garden really embodies that. And then in the back garden, I've learned what works, what doesn't. I'm starting to think about maybe I should take out a portion of what's left of the lawn back there and put in a water feature. So that's something that I'm currently contemplating. I would probably have to keep an eye on it with the black walnuts falling, but you know, you do what you can, right? So I would say I grew up in a cement paradise. I might be a city girl at heart, but I definitely love my open space and I love the trees.
All right, ladies, it's time for our last question. Why don't we close by having you tell us a little bit about your website, where we can find you on social media, and then what, if any, upcoming events that you have that you'd like listeners to know about?
So my website, my company is called More Than Oregano. Our tagline is living big garden dreams in small garden spaces. And I think that is where my natural skills and talents lie. I kind of have a way of helping people visualize what it is they want to do and go ahead and accomplish it. And so I do that photographically. I love to share photography, and now I'm doing it even more professionally. And I've always done it on the side myself. So it's very fun to be doing that professionally now and offering those photographs not only on my blog, but also people can come to my professional gallery and they can download images and they can order images that are done in a fine art quality. So you can go to my website and you can shop the gallery. While you're there, you can go over to the blog, and that's where my newest information that I'm sharing with my readers is there. But one thing that I think people are really interested in is getting signed up for my newsletter. I'm giving away both books as well as products to help you, help my readers make their garden dreams come true, and that's been something that's been very successful. In the next month, we're going to be giving away Tara Nolan's Raised Bed Revolution, and then each month thereafter, we'll also be having a special giveaway, and there's also discounts to our gallery. So we'd love to connect with you that way. So you can connect with me, Beth Billstrom, via my website, More Than Oregano, but you can also find me on Instagram. I have a very active Instagram feed. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm fairly active on Twitter under Beth Billstrom. And please do connect with me on Facebook, my Facebook page at More Than Oregano.
That's great, Beth. Jen.
I came up with the name Frau Zinnie because I was trying to be cute way back in 2009. And I was playing on my mom's German roots because she was 100% German. And I was like, oh, it'd be so cool if I had a garden blog and I was like Fraulein something. So then I was like looking up in Google Translate, like how to do that. And, that's kind of dicey, because Google Translate's not so good sometimes. So I learned that Fraulein is if you are a miss, if you're not married. And I was like, well, that would be misrepresentation that if I, so obviously I thought too much into this. And then I was like, all right, what's Mrs.? So then I learned that Mrs. is Frau. And I'm like, okay. So I got the first part. And then I was like looking for flowers that I really liked and how they translated over. And Zinnie was translation for zinnia. So that's how I came up with Frau Zinnie. At first, when I would introduce myself as that, people would be like, I don't get it. But I guess that it's been around enough now that like people that are in the area know about it. So it's kind of like taking on its own little life. You can find me online at frauzinnie.com. I prefer Instagram and Twitter. I feel like they're both really great channels. Of course, I had to be difficult and not name my handle Frau Zinnie. So my Twitter handle is Jen M. Gardens, and my Instagram handle is jmcguinness31. For upcoming events, I am currently trying to whip my garden into shape, and I'm hoping to host my first open garden day in August. So I haven't officially put it out there yet, just in case it doesn't come together. But that's my goal. I'm hoping to actually be able to have a garden tour. And I was partly inspired to do that because I heard your podcast recently about setting up your garden for guests. And I was like, yeah, I could do it too.
That's great. I like that. Good job.
Thanks. Well, this is Tracy, and I'll start with our website, which is plantsmap.com, and it's plantsmap.com. And again, you can get to it from your smartphone or your tablet or your desktop. And you can search and find Tracy Blevins on the Explore page in the community section. And we also have an e-journal on info.plantsmap.com/journal, where you can learn more about our community members through our featured profiles and our e-journal news. We also have become members of or supporting network partner of the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge. So we have a journal about Be Counted, because we're trying to encourage our members in our community that have pollinator gardens with plant lists to join the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge, so people can learn about the plants to support those type of habitats. In August, we're doing the Garden Writers Association annual conference, which is going to be incorporated with Garden Walk Buffalo, which we've been sponsors of for a few years. They're also on PlantsMap. That's the last weekend in July every year. That's Garden Walk Buffalo. And then we're going to the Garden Writers Annual Conference, which will be enjoying the Garden Walk Buffalo open gardens. And then later in August, we'll be attending the annual conference of the American Conifer Society in Syracuse. Of course, when I'm not on plantsmap.com in our community, you can find us on Twitter at plantsmap is our handle, or we also prefer Instagram, but we're also on Facebook and LinkedIn and Google. I prefer Twitter and Instagram besides PlantsMap. So
I love it. I love it. Well, ladies, I can't thank you enough for being on the show with me today and talking about day 2. What an awesome day of the Garden Bloggers Fling for 2017. It was a true pleasure. This was so fun.
Thanks for having me on, Jennifer. It was always fun.
it was fun. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for including me. I had a blast.
All right. Thanks, ladies.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank
Bye.
you. Well, that's it for our show today, featuring my fellow garden bloggers and our review of day 2 of the 2017 Garden Bloggers Fling. I hope you enjoyed learning about the private suburban gardens of Barbara Katz, Debbie Friedman, Jeff Minnick, Steve Brunitzer, Ellen Ash, and Peg Beer, as well as the public garden, Brookside Gardens. And I just want to give a quick shout out and a big thank you to my fellow garden bloggers who joined me in our discussion of day 2, and they are Beth Billstrom of the blog More Than Oregano, Jen McGuinness of the blog Frau, Zinnie, and Tracy Blevins of Plants Map. I also want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, my fabulous editor, Eric Begay, my copywriter, Ein Kadena, and my project manager, David Gregerson. Just a reminder, I'll have all the generous information that was shared on the show today under the Still Growing podcast page on my website over at 6footmama.com. That's the number 6, FTMAMA.com. And don't forget, the next time you're in Facebook, head on over to the search bar and type in the name of our listener community for the show. It's the Still Growing Podcast Group. I'd love to meet you in the group. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to the members of the group who make up my listener advisory board: Beth Engel, Denise Pugh. Denise gardens in North Mississippi and is a contributing writer to Mississippi Gardener magazine; Amy Von Atchen, Patricia Chandler Newport. Patricia is the owner of Backyard Urban Gardens out of Kego Harbor, Michigan; Deb Gibson; and Peggy Ann Montgomery. Peggy Ann Montgomery was featured in episode 553. She's the brand manager at American Beauty's Native Plants. And of course, we chatted all about native plants, and I hope that you're incorporating more of them into your 2017 landscape. Well, I hope you can enjoy some lovely weather wherever you're at. I hope you get a little bit of rain, and I hope you find some amazing plant sales because it's that time of year. Things are going to be clearanced out. So have fun shopping. Have a great week, everyone. Still Growing with Jennifer Ebling is a 6footmama.com production made in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. Still Growing is a weekly gardening podcast dedicated to helping you and your garden grow.